Good afternoon, colleagues. Thank you and welcome. I welcome you all to the last day of the Tana Forum. It has been an incredibly engaging, thought-provoking, and more importantly, I would say interesting discussion. The Tana Forum has continued to be, again, for the 9th time, an open and frank discussion and a much-needed platform to discuss issues of critical importance to our continent, but in an informal way as much as we can be able to make it. So for today's session, we will kickstart the day with the Voices of Tana, where we get to hear from the friends of Tana, where we want to hear their perspectives of what exactly the Tana Forum has meant for them for the last 9 years, what it means to them today, what the thematic engagement means. This year's theme, Revitalizing the Continental Free Trade Agreement, the spirit of Pan-Africanism, looking at its linkages to sustainable development and peace, is something that had been discussed across the board by friends of Tana who have been here with us this year and the previous years. So I think without taking any time, I would want to perhaps give my colleagues an opportunity to share with us the voices from Tana this year, and just listen and take in what exactly this has meant, what this platform has meant for the participants across the board. Thank you.
Tana is about leadership and citizenship. That's why we launch it with the leadership lecture. And that implied in the leadership lecture is the responsibility of citizenship that enables all of us not only to sacrifice all and serve, but to innovate and transform. Tana is about Pan-Africanism and internationalism. It's about our lens. It's about our ideas and consciousness. It's about our narrative, our aspirations, and our solutions. Ambassadors here present, directors of various African Union institutions, honorable members of the African Academy and civil society, welcome. I wanted to practice my Amharic, and I'm not sure why you are laughing. Inkon Dehena Metu. President Begi would have said, Siana Mugela Lonken, and our brothers from East Africa would have said, what would they have said? Right. Until you discover, I will not let you know. My name is Brian Tamuka Kagoro. We would have said in East Africa, Karibuni Kwetu, which means welcome. And welcome, you're welcome.
Thank you for being here in numbers, but also in quality. It feels great to see many familiar faces, friends, as well as newcomers. I'm personally very happy to be back to this beautiful city of Bahardar to attend the 8th edition of the Tana Forum, a forum I know well for having attended all past editions except I think one or two. Michelle would know. I did so because I believed in the candid dialogue and in-depth exchange, in the interaction and consultation with a broad-based African constituent based on issues on security and challenges faced by the continent towards Africa-centered solutions that Tana is known for. And I still continue believing in the spirit of Tana. It gives me a great opportunity to thank those who contributed relentlessly to bring Tana to this high level.
I think the conversation happening here at Tana Forum is at the heart of what the African Union is doing. It's about economic integration. It's about continental security. It's about the free trade area that we have been celebrating. And it's about young people. So we just finished the last panel on migration, and this is an issue that affects young people in Africa. But also the theme of the year of the African Union is refugees, displaced, and Iranians. And the face of these refugees are young people. So every single conversation happening here, the questions that are raised here, the recommendations, the outcome of it speaks to what the African Union does.
Why is Tana Forum so important, and what is it for me? One of the IPS's pillars, we have 4 pillars: peace education pillar, we have peace research pillar, we have community engagement pillar, and we have policy dialogue pillar. The pillars, particularly of community engagement, is realized through Tana Forum. So Tana Forum for us is a realization forum of knowledge, of research, of peace and security in Africa and beyond. So we take it as a podium, as a crucible where ideas can be generated, ideas can be tested, ideas can be informally engaged by leaders and the led coming together under baobab tree in Bahardar near Lake Tana, and the led and the leaders coming together, meeting each other, asking, talking about their security, past, present, and future. The theme, as you may remember, is Africa Continental Free Trade Area, creating Pan-Africanism, revitalizing it, breathing new life into it. We have chosen AfCFTA deliberately. Number one, it's been now ratified about it is being signed by about 54 countries except Eritrea. It's been signed by majority. We hope it will also be ratified by many, and it will be put into practice. Most important, IPS's vision is, of course, having a united Africa. It is it's a Pan-African institution, so we like to have Pan-Africanism once again its life, and then we like to see, to start building Africa We Want agenda, which is the AU agenda of 2063. So we have chosen deliberately this AfCFTA for 2020 because we have to walk the talk, that we are talking about united, we prosper, divided, we remain in poverty. So to realize that, I think 2020 should really show that. By the way, 2020 is quite different because of the COVID pandemic, which has been rocking the whole world. And we didn't lose hope. We didn't remain desperate. So we tried to see how much we can really withstand while we are working to our destiny of Pan-Africanism, how much we are resilient. So it's part of testing our resilience as well. So this 2020 theme showed us what's meant by Pan-Africanism, what's coming together. That's why we have to bring together the hybrid one, that is online and on-site, or actual and virtual coming together. I'm sure you have seen it. So that's really the very idea behind it. Yes, that is a fundamental question, because we raise, what does AfCFTA means to an ordinary African at grassroots level? What does it mean? We may have it at African level, at African Union level, we may have it at university or research center level, but what does it mean to everyday life of an individual African, an ordinary rural African? What does it mean to them? This can be debated, discussed, and then this can be translated into policy. That policy could be implemented by the leaders at grassroots level as well. Then you can talk about citizenship-centered leadership. Then you can see that AfCFTA has also meaning to ordinary Africans as well, so that we can make the spirit of Pan-Africanism work for Africans.
I want to tell you just a little bit about Tana, and that's presumptuous because looking around the room, most people are veterans of Tana, but sometimes you have to repeat what the house is about so that people are reminded that the culture in this house is different from the usual practice. In this space, so when I was coming here, President Salama, you know, they were asking me, well, Tana, you're always talking about it, what's Tana? So my answer was, Tana is a place, it's a space, it's an idea and an ideal, it's a journey. It's a place where we encourage former and sitting heads of state to dialogue with African activists and thinkers and partners from the development community, as well as the length and breadth of African bureaucrats about African issues and African solutions. Often when persons leave office, like the former heads of state, they feel freer to talk about issues that may have been too weighty and too sensitive when they were in office. So we do not want to waste that time for deep and wide reflections on very substantive issues. So Tana is not a talk show. Every Tana we've come to, there's been a report, research, and evidence that informs what we do. So I'd like you, as we dialogue, please do not make any assumptions that no one understood. In this room, if you were to measure intelligence and capacity in electricity terms, this would have been a power station. So there is no need to over-elaborate. Once you've made your point, I would encourage you to move on. Make no assumptions at all about that. When persons leave office, like the former heads of state will tell you, they feel freer to talk about issues that may have been too weighty and too sensitive when they were in office. So we do not want to waste that time for deep and wide reflections on very substantive issues. So Tana is not a talk show. Every Tana we've come to, there's been a report, research, and evidence that informs what we do. So I'd like you, as we dialogue, please do not make any assumptions that no one understood. In this room, if you were to measure intelligence and capacity in electricity terms, this would have been a power station. So there is no need to over-elaborate. Once you've made your point, I would encourage you to move on. Make no assumptions at all about that. But Tana goes everywhere, Your Excellencies. Tana is here in Badr. Tana has had pre-forums in different places. Tana had an essay competition for young people to engage. Tana holds multi-stakeholder forums. Tana participates in discussions about peace and security outside Africa, and the partners from Munich Security Council are here, and we duly acknowledge them, along with all the other partners of Tana that are in this room. But Tana is about Pan-Africanism and internationalism. It's about our lens. It's about our ideas and consciousness. It's about our narrative. It's about our aspirations and our solutions.
Thank you very much. I think the African Continental Free Trade Area has huge benefits to developing countries like Ethiopia. The first benefit is it boosts your productive capacity, where you produce goods and services that can be traded with, and that brings productivity increment, innovation, and creative ways of doing business. The second advantage is you have to make your business climate conducive, and you have to make the doing business climate which is less costly. And the cost of doing business will reduce because you become efficient and effective, and your competitiveness grows. I think this is a second advantage. As Africa and most of the developing countries, they have 70% below the age of 30 and the young continent, and we can use comparative advantage of African continental free trade area to create jobs and enhance entrepreneurial capacity of our young people. So I think these are some of the basic advantages. But beyond that, if we have an economy of scale, we can compete globally with other continents like China, European Union, United States, and Canada, and Northern Atlantic countries. So all this helps Africa to benefit from the integration through African continental free trade area. I think COVID-19 has exposed the weaknesses of the economic structure in Africa. Most African countries, including my own, has suffered because of COVID-19 pandemic, simply because when the lockdown came, those countries who import massively food items and capital goods from outside has suffered. So that's also true to my own country. And when the tourism sector, which is a service sector that Africa benefits, has dwindled, and that has created job loss in millions. And so that calls for us to diversify our economy and work for resilience to such kind of pandemic and shocks. So I think it's an opportunity by itself if we use it properly, so that we can come out of this pandemic in a better way. And preparedness is also very important. This is a time where you can prepare for bouncing back and recovery. And by the time you do that, you can, put your house in order and bring about transformational changes post-COVID circumstances. And the other thing is that COVID-19 has not affected actually Africa as it is in other continents. We have some advantage because of our age structure, but unemployed youth in many cases. So you have to transform the structure of your economy quickly so that create jobs to these young people. And beyond that, I think African countries need to understand that they have to cooperate, they have to integrate quickly. So then comes the African Continental Free Trade Area, continental COVID-19. The ideal was the decision of African leaders to have African solutions to African problems. That's the objective behind which Tana Forum has been formed. So if that's the case, then we have sole responsibility with support of external actors as Africans to solve our own problems with African means and African ways and African understanding. So this forum is a premier and a flagship forum where it has created awareness and innovative ideas and concrete, measures that can help those who participate and those who come across Tana Forum's decisions and discourses. I think it is the most African institution. So I believe that Tana Forum should continue. This is the 9th edition. I was part of all the editions of Tana Forum. I am also a member of Tana board. And I think this is an Pan-African institution on security in Africa, and we have to nurture it. Like the Munich Security Conference for the global community, this is a uniquely positioned African institution. So I know Tana Forum has contributed a lot to resolve the security problems in Africa, and leaders who are involved in this process has benefited from the discussions and the policy prescriptions that has come out from the Tana Forum deliberations. So I think this is a forum that has to be nurtured, grow, and as an advocacy, the institution should be embraced.
And to me, this is a wonderful experience to be at the Tana Forum for the first time, to really get the context right, to know about Ethiopia and to know about the dynamics in the Horn of Africa. I think this is it is key. I mean, the latest session that we came out of was on migration. So it's connected, whether you are in Europe or in Africa. So we are all connected in one way or the other. It was said that migration is a scar on humanity, and we as a bilateral, but also the multilateral agencies like the UN and the AU really needs to support this agenda. So we are all connected, and in that way, what came out of the Tana Forum needs to take us to a better place. So we are better informed of how we combat migration, but also how we create better prosperity on the continent and in the world.
Well, for me, what is one of the great things about Tana Forum is that it enables an academic like myself to mix with the practitioners on the ground who are actually conducting these peace operations, and it gives me a chance to both learn from, gives me practical experience, but also for me to discuss the lessons that I think should be learned about this mission. So it's the mix of people that Tana brings here that's really important. It goes in civil society, academics, and political leaders.
I think Tana Forum is a space of conversation, asking tough questions and addressing them in a multi-stakeholder approach. So you find here the United Nations, the African Union, the regional economic communities, different partners, developing partners, civil society, activists. And I think that what makes it unique, because it is high level, but at the same time, it speaks to what's happening on the ground. I really admire, which I was surprised, my first time here, I admire the format. There is no vertical format. We all sit in a circle and have a conversation. I was on a panel yesterday and we literally had a conversation together with the former president of Ghana. So there is also potential of Tana Forum being a place of intergenerational dialogue if we bring more and more young voices into this place. So I admire the format, and I hope the format will continue to be engaging and horizontal, and will continue to speak to this networking space where we can come up with really concrete solutions and be frank and honest about what is the problem and how do we deal with it.
Well, as I said yesterday, number one, I'm very grateful and thankful to God, as many people in Africa are believers, one faith or another, that God has spared us from the worst, as we hear from other continents, especially from the West. Many countries have implemented very strict containment measures which have brought difficulties and pain to millions, which I think a bit unnecessarily or even prematurely. But everything said, we are grateful that the impact on the people has not been as bad as everybody else expected from those countries which always think Africa must always be the source and suffer the worst. In this case, we have been spared. But at the same time, a lot of people's lives have changed because of this, because many people have lost employment because of these containment measures. Our economies are attached to the global economies. As the global economies have suffered, our African economies have suffered. So many people have been unemployed, so many organizations closed. But at the same time, we have seen in case of governments that it's not easy. Some have taken advantage of COVID-19, the freedom. So unfortunately, that some countries have used COVID-19 as an excuse to suppress people's rights and to have people not free in their own countries. They can't gather, they can't assemble, they can't express themselves, all on the pretense of preventing COVID. We have seen it in different countries, which I don't need to mention, but that is not the impact which you would expect from people who are suffering. And also from the people of Africa, as I said last time, maybe this in the case of rule of law and fairness and justice for people, that it has exposed how weak our governments are in terms of enforcement, in terms of justice, in terms of anti-corruption measures, after we have heard so many stories of corruption related to COVID-19 responses. I've been thinking about that, and I'm not so sure that there is a very specific impact of COVID-19 on peace and security as such, apart from what I have said within countries. That countries, I don't think it has brought problems between countries, but within countries, yes. Where the suppression of freedoms is, of course, not a peaceful thing. It's not a secure thing, which must be worked out on. However, when we talk about Africa Continental Free Trade Area, I think COVID-19 has opened our eyes to see the innovative nature of Africans and the spirit of Africans. Because of all this containment, we have been forced to be independent. Even though the Europeans and the Asians have been trying to sell things, there have been a lot of ingenuity of people in terms of medication, for example, have a new look at traditional medicine, which some countries have focused on, and say, well, and try to exchange them. But at the same time, all these innovations by young people, by our own industries, by our own states, to focus on production within Africa. And I think that is the core of Continental Free Trade Area, because what is the use if you are not going to be producing what you actually need, if you are going to be just re-exporting things which you import from other places? But I think what we have seen by the COVID-19 is that really Africa can make hospital beds, can manufacture ventilators, can manufacture and produce mass PPEs, personal protection equipment, which if we enhance this broad 1-point-something billion market, definitely our industries should be developed further because of the demand which we have. And I think that we can produce, even process our own things in terms of food, in terms of medicine, even the vaccines should be produced and distributed in Africa. And I think this is a chance that we have. It has opened our eyes to see the potential of Continental Free Trade Area, but also of what we can produce ourselves. I would like to think that civil society, part of which include churches, which I represent as All Africa Conference of Churches, who deal on a daily basis with the grassroots people, not when there is election, but every day. We see the impact of poverty and the impact of our own governments when they do not abide by what they say. When they come to the people and tell them what they are going to do and don't do it. Of course, it is our role to call out the governments. And I think civil society must continue, even though I'm afraid in some countries the freedoms of civil society is being contained more and more these days. But actually the role of civil society should be to educate the people about Continental Free Trade Area, to popularize it, but also to support governments when they do the right things, but also to call them out when they don't. Because my question is, when they sign these agreements, Are they really serious? Have they read them? Do they intend to implement them? So we must hold them to account, as we have started to do as All Africa Conference of Churches with silencing the guns. We are collecting, I don't know how many thousands of signatures by young people to present to the African Union to say, hey, this is what you guys said. Why are you not doing it? Or visa-free travel within Africa. In 2018, they committed, they signed, but up to now, no, they're not doing it. So it is our role as civil society to continue reminding the government, say, hey, this is what you promised for the betterment of Africa, please do it.
The tendency in past reports has been to focus on casualties and impacts of armed groups, mostly in respect of conflicts. But in the 2018 report, you see a more wider focus on other issues of peace and security that have to do more with adverse effects of climate change, for example, and then also the outbreak of communicable diseases and public health issues. As you know, currently ongoing, there's still a battle with Ebola in the DRC, and it is our hope that it will be contained. You remember a few years ago, West Africa was hit by Ebola, and it took quite a lot of effort from the whole international community to be able to overcome it. I mentioned in respect of peace and security was noted again, very sadly, that women continue to bear the brunt of insecurity on the African continent. They are victims of rape, kidnapping, and death. And the areas around Lake Chad, the area were mentioned, and also in Central African Republic, where some militia fighters attacked, kidnapped, and mass raped women. These are noted in the report. It also notes the abduction of another 110 girls in Nigeria. Our information is that after negotiations with the insurgent groups, many of these girls were returned, but we know that of the original Chibok girls, many of them still remain missing, and it's a very unpleasant environment for young girls who just want to go to school and get an education in that part of Nigeria.
My name is Samiha Abdul Malik. I'm a Tana Forum Technical Committee member and also governance and gender consultant. Okay, thank you. I mean, I think one thing that we need to start off with is an acknowledgement that the benefits, especially for women, are not automatic. We already see within national economies, regional economies, that there are many gender inequalities within our economies. But I think what's really important is the amount of work that's gone into looking at the gender dimensions of this free trade agreement and looking at how we can support member states in their implementation to allow women, particularly women entrepreneurs. We see in many countries, the bulk of women in the private sector work in small and medium enterprises, which has its own particular dynamics and challenges, such as issues of financing, scale, efficiency, access to technology. And I think if we can start to unpack all of these things, we will be able to see women in the private sector being able to benefit from this continental agreement. But of course, I think the broader opportunities are the opportunities to kind of expand their businesses outside of the national scope, access to financing, which sometimes is limited in member states, and really the kind of reach that the agreement would be able to give. But I really want to reiterate that it will take a lot of concerted effort from member states and regional economic communities to take a gendered approach to the implementation of this free trade agreement and address some of the existing challenges that women entrepreneurs already have within existing economies. So, I mean, I think in terms of the role that women have played in terms of addressing some of these issues, first off is actually bringing visibility to some of these security threats. Women have been at the forefront of highlighting human security threats, which perhaps states tend to either shy away from or have less of a focus on. So issues of climate security, issues of violence against women and girls, security threats that are in a sense not macro security threats, but really have a huge impact on the lives of African citizens. I think women have really been at the forefront of pushing and doing advocacy to get these acknowledged as legitimate security threats. The second is really the role women have played in mediation and conflict resolution. And this is, I mean, we've seen it primarily at a community level, at a local level, through informal networks, etc. And I think really pointing to what you asked around what more needs to happen, I think it's that these initiatives, these platforms, this capacity that we have within women peace builders really needs to be integrated in formal and state-based peace building architectures. And I think this is the challenge for us moving forward, to ensure that all this capacity that we have, all this initiative that we have from women, both at the level of bringing policy attention to issues, but also resolving security issues, gets integrated into formal processes. Because what we see now are formal peace processes, formal conflict resolution processes that are largely male-dominated or dominated, or are not inclusive, let me put it that way. So I think that is the biggest challenge right now. It's not a lack of capacity, it's not a lack of understanding of some of the issues. It's really about how do you bring these two, the informal to bear on the formal processes and the state. By formal, I mean state processes of conflict resolution and management. I think when we say East African women, I think, you know, the CFTA is really talking about regional economies and expanding our economies beyond the national scope. So I think this really follows from the fact that women, not just in East Africa, but in different regions of the continent, really have been mobilizing across country lines, right? They've been mobilizing on issues of cross-border trade, on peace and security, on violence against women and girls. So you have this capacity to network transnationally. So I think this is the capacity that really women in East Africa, as well as other regions, can bring to bear in the implementation. You already have that networked system or platform of women across different sectors. It's really about how do you leverage that in pursuit of ensuring that there's communication on the free trade agreement to grassroots citizens, that there is advocacy with governments in terms of ensuring implementation is gender sensitive, and that the benefits of this free trade agreement is inclusive. So I mean, I think, again, just to reiterate, it's about East African women are already networked across various sectors. How do we use that platform? Crucially, as I said, around communication, but also advocacy, but also monitoring the impact and implementation of the free trade agreement and making sure that it's actually delivering for women and girls, and obviously and is inclusive in terms of the growth that it sustains in countries and in the East Africa region.
Well, you are discussing peace and security, and all the work that the Department of Peace Operation and Political and Peace Building Affairs are doing is related to the peace and security dimension of the global world, but also focusing on Africa. And in the context of focusing on Africa, Horn of Africa and the recent development, which, as everybody agrees, has been like surprising everyone in a good sense, and the tectonic change is of course of concern to me, because this is my day every day, and work with my collaborators in New York to support the countries, and doing this through support to the African Union, because as part of the vision of the Secretary General and the effort of the subsidiarity, we are supporting the efforts coming from the continent. So African Union and the one which we are supporting, because they are the ones who are blocking the deals in terms of peace negotiations, peace agreement, etc.
In the year 2018, we saw positive developments on the continent in respect of peace and security. And these include, as has been mentioned already by Her Excellency the President, the existing rapprochement that has been established between Ethiopia and Eritrea. The whole of Africa is standing in solidarity with the two countries to be able to resolve the age-old Cold War that has existed between the two. And it's our belief that this rapprochement will bring a new wave of change in the whole of the Horn of Africa. And we believe establishing peace in the Horn of Africa will lead to tremendous human progress and development. In the course of the year, 27 African countries, according to the report, held elections and saw successful transfers of power. It shows that democracy is becoming entrenched on the African continent. There was the expansion of space for civil society engagement, and so more civil society groups sprang up and participated in respect of pushing for issues of good governance. There was also increased participation of young people in politics and governance. In many countries, we saw young people standing for electoral office and winning, entering parliaments or local councils and other places. This is a significant development, and we wish that this will be encouraged so that more the youth participate actively in the way their countries are governed.
There are two types of illicit trade. The illicit trade that is the consequence of informality. We know that in our borders we have lots of transactions that don't go through customs and don't get actually accounted, which serves to explain why intra-Africa trade sometimes is underestimated. And then there is the illicit trade that is the result of very complex, sophisticated, organized crime that is also preventing public resources from being collected and is actually not benefiting for the common good. So what we need to institute is formalization, but also facilitation, easiness of providing the instruments, what is called trade facilitation. So we have a much stronger basis for countries to have cross-border operations and for value chains to be established. Now, what we know is that illicit trade right now is thriving. And we know also illicit financial flows are thriving. And they are thriving because despite all the arguments about security, making sure that our boards are controlled, and all these reasons that those who oppose CFTA normally put at the table, the reality is exactly the opposite. It's because we don't have the easiness of doing trade through the normal channels, and because we don't provide the basis for the establishment of predictable forms of economic transaction, that we have this type of operations going more and more into the direction of undermining our regional integration. Curbing illicit flows is about making sure that we put in place the tools and instruments and the policies that are going to regulate our transactions in a way that we don't have all this profiteering going on. But let's make no mistake, it's not just an African problem. This is a global problem. And part of the incentives for illicit flows to continue to flow are precisely the reasons that make this an African problem with global solutions. So we need more than just goodwill on the part of the African leaders, the African governments, the African interlocutors. But I think we have to do our part. And the part that Africa can do is to put in place regulatory schemes that are going to be much more stringent and much more capable of catching this type of operations. And that is very much the same philosophy that is behind the CFTA. The CFTA needs to have protocols. CFTA needs to have a dispute settlement mechanism. It needs to understand exactly what are the consequences of determining such or such type of intellectual property regimes. It needs to make predictability part of the operations. It needs trade observatory that is going to inform people about the best practices. So all these tools and mechanisms are very similar to the type of policies that are required for tackling the issue of illicit financial flows. So if we are going in the direction of solving one problem, we'll certainly be able to solve the other one as well. Trade negotiations are very complex. They require a lot of technical details to be sorted out. And I think if you look into the speed under which these current negotiations have been mastering the signing of protocols, the signing of a ratification of protocols, and so on, we can be satisfied that there is momentum. Of course, COVID has perturbed the calendar for everything, including, obviously, the CFTA that was about to be entering into force, that was going to have a special summit under the South African presidency, and all of that has been postponed. But still, Africans have demonstrated their will by making the opening of the Secretariat a reality, even during a pandemic. They have finally attained universal ratification, and they have continued the negotiations remotely. So these are indications that there is no doubt this type of demonstrations of will are pointing into a completely different agency on the part of the African countries. And let's not forget that our negotiations with our largest trading partner bloc, which is the European Union, have also continued apace. And we have now definitely reached an understanding amongst Africans that we need to defend our interests, and that requires postponement for good reasons, not necessarily for bad reasons. So some of the postponements are not necessarily bad. What we know is that the technicalities of a trade agreement will go for quite some time into a negotiation stage. I don't predict that the CFTA will be understood, implemented in detail by the border guard until 3 years down the line. So let's not rush on things that require substantiation, sophistication, and that definitely is going to put the basis for a much larger undertaking, which is a free market.
That was a very insightful video, and I think quite a number of reflections to take in. In the interest of time, I think I would like us to take a quick break, 10 minutes to be precise, so that we can be able to come back for the next discussion, which is making the CFTA work. So thank you, colleagues, and we'll see you in 10 minutes. Welcome back. I think it was a well-deserved 10-minute coffee break. And our last panel to close the Tana 2020 is here, an esteemed panel. But more importantly, I think, is for us to take stock of some of the interesting reflections we have had over the last 5 days or so. And I think for those who managed to join us online to listen to the voices from Tana, we had a few takeaways, and some of them were that Tana is not a place, it's a space. And that statement could not be more true in the context of COVID, where we have streamed live for the first time. The Tana 9th Forum has gone virtual with participants from all over the globe. And I think that spirit of the Tana is still very much captured in that statement. It has been a long journey, the last 6 days as for the Tana 2020, but it has also been an interesting experience, I would say, from the first Tana to the 9th. Brian, what do you think?
It's been a great experience. So think about this. Tana Forum 2012, the very first high-level forum. It focused on state fragility and the prospects for peace in Africa. Then Tana Forum 2013, the second Tana, it focused on security and organized crime. Then the third Tana focused on the impact of illicit financial flows on peace and security in Africa. The fourth Tana focused on secularism and politicized faith. The fifth Tana focused on Africa in the global security agenda. And the sixth Tana focused on natural resource governance in Africa. The seventh Tana focused on ownership of Africa's peace and security provision, financing and reforming of the African Union. And the eighth Tana focused on political dynamics in the Horn of Africa. If you turn around, we are in the 9th Tana, which represents history, and we're focusing on the AfCFTA revitalizing Pan-Africanism for sustainable peace and development in Africa. And the best thing we could do is listen to a cross-section of people who have worked on issues of development and security and issues of trade and also issues of migration, the things that speak to freedom of movement for goods and services and people, but also the things that speak to how to build security architecture that's sustainable. I'll leave you to do the introductions of our very able moderator, and then I will return after the session with you, maybe to share one more story for the road.
Excellent. I'm sure we are all looking forward to Brian's story. But before that, let us have our last session and let's hear from our esteemed panelists. And my duty here is very simple. I will introduce our moderator for today, Dr. David Luke, who's the coordinator of the Africa Trade Policy Center at the UN Economic Commission for Africa. Dr. Luke has worn several hats, but I think the most notable and most recent that we would want to capture in addition to that is his role in the WTO, in his work with the EPA, and around additional negotiations, including the time he served in the UNDP. Dr. Luke, I think over to you in the interest of time, and we look forward to hearing from you and your esteemed panelists. Thank you.
Thank you very much, moderators, and good afternoon, both to all of you who are here physically in the room and others who are joining us online. Let me just begin by saying that the peace, security, political stability theme of the previous Tana forums is certainly not out of place in this theme that we have been looking at this week, which is focusing on the African Continental Free Trade Area. Historically, trade has always been the basis of peace between countries, between communities throughout time. From the earliest times when a hunter may go out and kill game, come back and exchange it with the neighbor who may be a farmer and would have grain. That has been the basis of creating stability between communities, creating peace between communities. So fast forward to the 21st century, here we are talking about trade, the African Continental Free Trade Area, which once fully in place with all the various instruments that to make it operative, including not only protocols on trading goods and services, but also on investment, on competition, on intellectual property. It does have the potential to usher in a new era of trade governance, if I could put it that way, trade governance on the continent. And with as with political governance, trade governance has the potential to ensure predictability, to ensure stability, and to ensure the rule of law in the way that the nations on this continent trade with one another, but beyond the continent, the way that trade is carried out with external partners. So the theme is very much in line with the previous themes that the Tana Forum has been looking at. So this afternoon, we have a very distinguished panel, and I'd just like to briefly introduce the panel, and I'll be introducing them in greater detail before they speak. But first, I'd like us to introduce, as we always say, ladies first. It's my honor to introduce Ms. Maureen Achieng, who is the Chief of Mission of the International Organization for Migration to Ethiopia and the representative to the African Union and UNECA. Maureen, as always, it's a delight to be on the same panel with you, and we look forward to hearing from you. Next, I'd like to introduce Ambassador Stephen Auer, who is the Ambassador of Germany to Ethiopia. Ambassador, I'm sure that coming from Europe, you would have a lot of insight in the ways in which trade actually is a basis for peace between nations as well. And next, I'd like to introduce Emmanuel Benser, who is the Deputy Executive Director of the AfCFTA Policy Network, which is based in Accra, Ghana, which is where the AfCFTA Secretariat is headquartered. Emmanuel, as always, also welcome to this panel. Then we have online the African Union Commissioner for Trade and Industry, Ambassador Albert Muchanga. Commissioner would also like to welcome you, and we'll be introducing you in greater detail later. Each panelist would have 10 minutes to make their interventions, after which we would have an open discussion with questions and comments, both from within the room and from those who have joined us online. And staying with my concept of ladies first, I'll call upon Maureen Achieng as to make the first intervention. And as I've already mentioned, Maureen is the Chief of Mission of the International Organization for Migration here in Ethiopia and representative to the African Union and the UNECA. Prior to this her current posting, Ms. Achieng served as head of the International Partnerships Division at IOM headquarters in Geneva, Switzerland, between 2008 and 2015. And in this position, she led the IOM institutional support to global and regional migration dialogue and cooperation platforms and was responsible for building, sustaining, and expanding a partnership with other UN agencies under the auspices of the then Global Migration Group. From 2004 to 2007, she served as IOM Chief of Mission in Haiti, and while serving in this capacity, she received the IOM Director General's Award in 2005 for her accomplishments and strong leadership. Ms. Acheng has also served in various other IOM country offices and headquarter functions in program management and technical support roles. For example, in Senegal, 2007 and 2008, Switzerland, 2002 to 2004, Kosovo, 2000 to 2002, and Kenya, 1998 to 2000, among other activities. So, Maureen, it's my distinct honor and privilege to invite you to the podium to make your intervention. All right.
Thank you very much, Dr. Luke, for that very generous introduction. And good afternoon, distinguished delegates to the 9th Tana Forum. This is my 5th Tana Forum, and I can't say how great a pleasure it is to see Tana Forum survive COVID-19. And that we're here and that we've had the deliberations we've had throughout the week, I think, speak to the commitment of a lot of policymakers and thinkers on this continent to continue the process of advancing discussion on issues that truly matter to this continent. Perhaps I'll just get right to it. There's so much to say. It's so broad a topic. I come to it from the perspective of a migration practitioner and policymaker, if you will. So the trade part of it, I don't understand with the sophistication that perhaps some of the other panelists on the podium or previous speakers this week do, but I do understand a thing or two about the connections between migration as a policy domain and others, in this instance, trade. I think we can all agree that the AfCFTA was never conceptualized to be a response to the peace and security challenges that Africa faces. And yet, if the AfCFTA were to be fully operationalized and implemented, and if all of the impediments to AfCFTA that several speakers this week have highlighted were to be addressed, the AfCFTA has the real potential to be a game changer in terms of addressing peace and security concerns on this continent. The movement of goods and services, though, on the continent will be based on the ability for there to be robust interstate cooperation and agreements that allow people and services and goods to freely move across borders. So one could say that, yes, there is a chance that the AfCFTA could well be the impetus that gets states more energized around collaboration with a view to addressing peace and security concerns on the continent. But the sad reality, and I had a speaker yesterday also mention this, is that Africa is lagging behind other world regions in terms of regional integration. If you take the picture, the statistics of regional integration by region, and juxtapose those with the data on intra-regional trade, they tell a pretty compelling story. And that story is that regions that are more integrated in terms of free movement of people are the regions that trade more with each other. And they're also the regions that are more prosperous, with Europe right at the top as being the region globally that is the most integrated. With Schengen, I think we all know how easy it is for Europeans to move across the continent. That's followed by North America, then Southeast Asia, then Latin America, and Africa comes right at the very end, both in terms of regional integration and intra-regional trade. Not surprising then that 33 of the 47 LDCs are to be found in Africa. The less regional integration there is, the less movement there is, the less intra-regional trade there is, and the less prosperity is created. Not to paint too bleak a picture, though, Africa has made tremendous strides in the last several years, starting with the decision in 2016 to introduce the Common Electronic Biometric African Passport in July of 2016, and that was followed in 2018, as we know, with the adoption of the AU Protocol on free movement of persons, the right of residence, and the right of establishment. So there is some progress. But we have seen what has happened ever since the Free Movement Protocol and the AfCFTA were adopted. We've seen these two protocols, which one could argue are pretty much two sides of the same coin, take very different trajectories in terms of the pace at which states ratified them. One would ask them, what's going on here? Why the enthusiasm for AfCFTA and why the fears around free movement? And the answers, I think, will be obvious to many of us why that is the case. Africa is mimicking a lot of the fears around migration that we see in other parts of the world expressed towards African migrants. And this is ironic, that Africans themselves would be scared of other African migrants coming in and would repeat the same fears that we hear when the Western world speaks about African migration. We need a new African narrative on migration, a narrative that is informed by facts, not fears, by evidence, and nothing more. That's not what's happening. Right now, with the narratives around foreigners coming in to take our jobs, we find Africa at a very low level in terms of a visa openness towards other Africans. The AfDB 2018 report shows some progress towards liberalizing the visa regimes for other African nationals, but again, still not where Africa needs to be. In 2018, this was at 25% in terms of African countries without a visa requirement for other African nationals. And that's an improvement from the 22% in 2017 and the 20% in 2016. So there's an opening up, but that opening up is not happening fast enough, and sadly is not resulting in a higher pace of ratification of the Continental Free Movement Protocol as compared with the AfCFTA. Of the top performing African countries on visa openness towards other African countries, these were the statistics. In 2018, it was 40% in East Africa, and East Africa ranks highest in terms of visa openness, followed by West Africa at 35%, Southern Africa at 20%, and 5% in North Africa. Central Africa lags the farthest behind in terms of free movement. There are a lot of misconceptions around free movement and what it will mean. I think even the titling of this session, I think I saw it read something like open borders. I think this is what terrifies a lot of countries, because open borders implies uncontrolled, unmanaged entries and exits. But free movement means anything but that. The Free Movement Protocol envisions regimes that lower the barriers to the movement of people, not that opens the borders to anybody to enter and exit as they wish. It really is about ensuring that border management agencies adopt a different posture in terms of mobility, managing mobility across borders. We know that over 90% of border crossings on this continent are bona fide. It doesn't then justify the posture of many of the security and border management agencies that we see on the continent that are more about keeping people out rather than facilitating entries and exits. That's something that needs to change. And then one might ask then, because this also links up with the theme of this Tana Forum, Pan-Africanism. If Africa is well and truly committed to Pan-Africanism, why this reluctance to open up to fellow African nationals? Why is it easy, and I think this should shame any African, why is it easier for a North American or a European to gain entry into another African country than it is for a fellow African? I think this is some of the data that really should compel us to reflect on what it is we're doing and how we should do it differently and why, and what the potential benefits of a freer movement regime on the continent might look like. So in terms of crafting a new narrative on African migration, what would an African approach to mobility look like? And here I would like to make the point that we're not likely to see a successful AfCFTA for as long as free movement lags behind. If there is that political commitment on AfCFTA, which I believe there is, and there is also the commitment on free movement, which there is, otherwise the protocol would never have been adopted. What is that narrative that Africa should be crafting around mobility and migration? What should it look like? With what presumptions should such an approach to mobility begin? And how would an African approach to mobility build on our histories of Pan-Africanism and African hospitality? Finally, and I would suggest most importantly, what kind of policies would be required to bring forth this new approach to African mobility that is, I think, the critical ingredient for the success of the AfCFTA? I would like, in closing, to suggest that there is a lot of reluctance around a freer mobility regime on the continent, and not all of these fears are baseless. A lot of those fears have to do with the fact that not all African countries are at the same level in terms of their civil registry systems, in terms of their border governance architecture, which poses a real concern to countries about who they might be letting into their country under a free movement regime. But the response then to these very valid concerns is not to erect ever higher barriers or to refuse to lower the barriers that exist. The response ought to be to pose the question, what are the needs of some of these countries that are lagging behind in terms of civil registry systems, passport issuance systems, border governance technology and systems at the borders? What are their needs and how can we collectively address those concerns to ensure that the countries that need the support get it, either through the African Union Commission or partners, non-governmental, non-state actors support. One key response here would be OSBPs, one-stop border posts, and we haven't seen as many of them in this continent as we would need to see if an AfCFTA is to firmly take root in a manner that allows both goods and services here implies people, to freely cross borders. So just the physical infrastructure at borders is by and large missing in a lot of these very important corridors on the continent. So I want to close by saying there are valid concerns that need to be addressed, and these need to be addressed through support for governance initiatives, both in terms of border management, but also governance in terms of managing entries and exits and internal security issues. Because again, here I want to re-emphasize most migrants are bona fide. Most migrants move to a country that isn't there, not with a view to sowing chaos or creating problems, but to make a living, perhaps create a job through a micro enterprise for themselves and for someone else. So how do we facilitate these largely bona fide movements? It's by addressing internal governance needs in many of our countries. Erecting higher barriers to free movement will only impede what it is that this very ambitious initiative that is the AfCFTA is trying to achieve. We have the option to stay safe, closed, and poor, or to open up and deal with the challenges that opening up might imply. But even better than opening up and dealing with those challenges is preparing for those challenges, because we know what they are. And they're largely issues that need to be addressed internally through improved governance. Mr. Moderator, I'll stop at that, and I thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cheng, for that intervention. I think the message is very clear, and I should also say it's backed by research undertaken at ECA that movement of people across borders goes hand in hand with the liberalization of trading goods and services as, under the AfCFTA. I think the message resonates very well. Mr. Cheng not only analyzed the issues, but also offered solutions related to better civil registration, better infrastructure at the borders, one-stop border posts, underscoring the fact that most migrants across borders, African borders, are in fact bona fide. And also the point that Africa does lag behind other continents on free movement, and the two free movement and trade and prosperity associated. One saving grace is that the protocol on trading services does allow for movement to provide services in the services sectors that are being liberalized. The first 5 for liberalization of business services, financial services, tourism, communications, and transport. So one would assume that as the AfCFTA is implemented, in these 5 sectors, there would be a movement of persons. At ECA, we're advocating for health and education to be added to these 5 priority sectors. Education, of course, related to movement of students across borders for the purpose of education. And then health, movement of health workers, because we have seen, especially in a pandemic crisis such as we're in now, that the movement of health workers is also helpful in terms of building capacities to cope with healthy emergencies. But the challenge is there, and I think, Maureen, you've made it very clear that there's some way to go. Now, it's my, excuse me, it's my honor to introduce the next speaker, who is the Ambassador of the Federal Republic of Germany to Ethiopia, Ambassador Stephen R., who is a very experienced diplomat and has served in various missions across the world. Prior to his designation as German ambassador to Ethiopia, he served as ambassador to the Republic of Korea since 2016. He started his career as a diplomat in 1990 in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Germany, and has served in German missions to the United Kingdom, Saudi Arabia, Italy, European Union, and the European Economic Area states. Ambassador R studied law and political science at Rheinische Friedrich Willem University of Bonn. Ambassador, you have the floor for your intervention. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Luke, for these nice kind words of introduction. This is the first time I attend the Tana Forum, and I must say I'm very much impressed by the stimulating debate we're having here. And I really look forward to our further discussion here. And I feel very much honored to be part of your panel. Thank you very much for inviting me here. Dr. Luke, dear panelists, Commissioner Muchanga, the AfCFTA is truly a flagship project for the African Union and the African continent. It is, as Maureen has said, a game changer, not only for the economic development of Africa and its people, but it is also a very important signal to the world. At a time when multilateralism in general and free trade in particular have come under stress, protectionism is rising. Africa is holding the torch for those advocating economic integration and multilateralism. Being both a European and an African, not only by birth, but also by heart, I know that Europe and Africa are staunch allies in the promotion of free trade. Having learned what enormous developmental and economic benefits Germany and Europe have had from being promoters of a strong European Union from the outset, we Germans know trade and economic integration brought economic development and prosperity to Germany, a war-torn country after the Second World War, which Germany has unleashed. And it brought peace and reconciliation, because trade and economic cooperation was at the beginning of Europe's integration process, which led to the creation of the European Union, the biggest single market in the world. Today, Germany, as a proud member of the European Union, at the center of the European continent, surrounded by friends and partners, is the fourth largest economy in the world and one of Europe's economic powerhouses. The award of the Nobel Peace Prize to the European Union in 2012 was therefore not only justified, but a vindication of the fact that economic and political integration promotes prosperity, peace, and security among the participating states. I'm convinced that we will witness the same developments in Africa, and the AfCFTA creates the foundation for it. And this is why Germany and the European Union have supported the establishment of the AfCFTA from day one, and we will continue to do so, based on the needs and the request of the AU, the RECs, the regional economic communities, the Secretariat of the AfCFTA, and of course of the member states. Africa has already moved a great step forward by making the right political decisions. Of course, the negotiations which have suffered a setback by the pandemic will need to be accelerated. But it is not just a question of right policies in going forward, but also about the actual implementation of the decisions already negotiated and agreed upon. This responsibility lies with the member states of the African Union, the individual member states. Maureen has already given you one example, the Protocol on Free Movement of Persons. One cannot advance trades in goods, let alone services, without allowing people to move. Therefore, it is a matter of calling on the responsibility of member states to abide by the agreements and put them into practice. The AU plays an important role in this. As the Secretary General of the AfCFTA Secretariat, Mr. Mene said, the AfCFTA can have a decisive impact on countering the effects of the pandemic, but implementation needs to happen fast. Ladies and gentlemen, let me mention two social groups who play an important role in the implementation of the AfCFTA. Firstly, the youth. They play an important role in holding their governments responsible and accountable. They need to make their voices heard and emphasize to the governments and political leaders that they need to make the AfCFTA implementation seriously, exactly because it will have an effect on their own future. I would like to come back to the example of the free movement of persons. We know some of the RECs have already advanced on this topic before the AfCFTA came into being, but the reality is different. For instance, take the EAC, which is on that matter of free movement, one of the most advanced RECs. When a young professional from a country A applies for a work permit in country B or vice versa, reality is that processes are tedious and often end with a negative result. This hampers economic development and integration. So it's up to the youth to demand from their governments that these changes actually take place. To empower the youth, information is key. I can only congratulate the African Union Commission on making the AfCFTA prominent, not only through fora such as this year, but also through transparent documentation on the internet and openness to scientific exchange. I would like to encourage the AU to continue in this vein and keep reaching out to the African citizens on the process and the progress of the AfCFTA. This is especially important for the youth, the future entrepreneurs and traders, so they can take advantage of this landmark agreement. The second group I would like to mention are women. They make up more than 70% of informal cross-border trade on the continent and thus face disproportionate effects by non-tariff barriers, including harassment, corruption, and misinformation about customs procedures. Women in Africa are more likely to work than in any other region worldwide, and almost 50% of women in the non-agricultural labor force are entrepreneurs. Accordingly, the implementation of the AfCFTA would in particular benefit women and promote women empowerment. Article 3 of the AfCFTA supports the promotion of sustainable and inclusive growth and gender equality. The Protocol on Trade and Services also states as an objective to improve export capacities, specifically for SMEs, women, and youth. It is also against this background that Germany is supporting the implementation of the AfCFTA through direct technical advisory, but also through a holistic approach towards regional economic integration within the African Union. With it, we also promote the central integration pillars like high-quality education and skills development to empower the African youth to be the entrepreneurs and traders of the future. And we support the ITC She Trades initiative, which aims to connect women entrepreneurs on the continent and empower women-owned businesses to benefit from trade and opportunities created by the AfCFTA. Ladies and gentlemen, central for the implementation of the AfCFTA is its secretariat. It has the unique mandate for the implementation of the agreement and has to make sure it is successful. But merely making sure that new tariff orders are implemented is not enough. Harmonization of standards and procedures among countries and the responsible institutions will be key for a successful implementation, economic integration, and development. The Secretariat has to bridge the existing gaps and offer platforms for exchange and to find solutions from harmonizing custom procedures to education qualifications. Furthermore, the Secretariat has to make sure the AfCFTA is working hand in hand with other key projects on the continent, like the NEPAD infrastructure project preparation facility to enhance transboundary infrastructure, and this program has already set up 12 different corridors across the continent. Currently, a priority action plan is being developed for endorsement at the EU Summit in 2021. And last not least, the Skills Initiative for Africa, which Germany is supporting with 140 million euros to enhance skills across the continent, which are demand-driven and improve training offers through close coordination with the private sector. Ladies and gentlemen, you may ask me as a German ambassador what role international players play in the implementation of the agreement. Well, we stand ready to assist where needed and are already doing so in providing expertise and other resources. This, for example, means pooling the knowledge of the integrated European single market that was built over decades and putting at the disposal of local experts from the continent or bringing African experts to where they are needed most. Providing platforms to share experiences among the continents and their respective experts can benefit both sides and can support future economic integration. Our German Development Corporation's support for the AfCFTA is specifically designed to support the exchange between the continental, regional, and member states level, to make sure that policies from the continental level can successfully be implemented on the regional and national level and vice versa, so that policies take the reality on the ground into account. One very practical, because visible example of our support is the setting up of a one-stop border post, which are already easing cross-border trade between member states to a great extent by significantly cutting waiting time at the border. So let me stop here. But before I would like to end, I would like to come back to what I've said in the beginning. True, trade and economic integration can be the drivers for political integration, leading to peace, stability, and prosperity. Economic disempowerment, on the other hand, and it was yesterday's topic in this forum, can trigger conflicts. Economic development and peace and security are mutually reinforcing. In this sense, the AfCFTA provides a unique chance for renewed intra-African cooperation, for revitalizing Pan-Africanism for sustainable peace and development, the theme of this year's forum. The AfCFTA is able to unleash the enormous potential of this African continent and will define Africa's relationship with Europe and the world for the years to come. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, for that intervention. I think your message very much complements the earlier message from Ms. Acheng in underscoring that trade liberalization goes hand in hand with the movement of people. You emphasize the important role of the youth, that this is, after all, about them, it's their future, and the key role that they have to play. You emphasize the role of women and drawing attention to the fact that informal cross-border traders are predominantly women, and also underscoring that Article 3 of the AfCFTA Framework Agreement does reference gender equality as one of the objectives of the agreement, alongside industrialization, alongside sustainable development. This article is very important because what it means is that when the AfCFTA is evaluated every 5 years, which is provided for in the framework agreement, these are the issues that it will be evaluated against. Is the AfCFTA advancing gender equality? That will be one of the questions, along with other aspects. Ambassador, let me also underscore that the technical support that Germany is giving to AfCFTA implementation is very much appreciated. For us at the ECA, we are hosting 2 technical advisors from GIZ who are working with us on trade analysis as well as on trading services and on the phase 2 issues of the AfCFTA negotiations. And that is already making a difference to the capacity that we can bring to the support we are providing to the African Union Commission in these areas. But beyond the support to ECA, as Ambassador, you pointed out, both German and European support is helping to ensure that, as you put it, that these policies that are embodied in the AfCFTA take a reality on the ground. And we're also aware that Germany and Europe are active in border reforms, including, as you mentioned, the one-stop border posts, etc. So here we have it. I think the ambassador has underscored the tremendous potential that the AfCFTA has. He has underscored also the experience in Europe, which, as he said, today stands as the world's 4th largest economy, built mainly on trade. One interesting statistic, which you did not mention, Ambassador, is that actually Europe leads the world in terms of trading within a single continent. There's more trade going on actually between the European partners and between them and the rest of the world, which I think is something that we can aim for on this continent. We have two more speakers, Emmanuel Benser and Commissioner Muchanga. We will call upon Commissioner Muchanga to close the speakers list. And now I'd like to turn to Emmanuel Benser, who is the Deputy Executive Director of the AfCFTA Policy Network in Ghana, which is a very active network. I'm a member of it, Emmanuel, I have to say. And almost every morning, the first thing I get is the news from the network coming to my WhatsApp account. So that's much appreciated. But Emmanuel is a Pan-Africanist as well. His Pan-Africanist activism includes the founding of East Africa Rising, which has morphed from a WhatsApp group populated by mostly journalists, activists, lawyers from the East African region, and selected Ghanaians who can unpack West Africa to East Africans. He's also part of a Facebook page educating followers on best practices from East and West Africa that can be replicated in either region. Emmanuel is a member of the African Peer Review Mechanism, Communications Network, as well as Agenda 2063 Media Network. I'd also say that Emmanuel is very tech savvy. I think this is an example of the African youth that the ambassador was talking about, that is already using the AfCFTA and networking around the AfCFTA. So, Mr. Benser, you have the floor for your intervention.
Thank you, moderator, Dr. David Zook. Eminent panelists, ladies and gentlemen, thank you. It's very nice to be here. Nice to be in Addis once again, a very beautiful country. And it's nice to be in a presentation discussing the African Continental Free Trade Area. Now, I'm going to have to go against form and present you with what I will call a tabula rasa, totally clean slate, kind of unprepared presentation, really, as a symbolic way of explaining how, for me, personally, the African Continental Free Trade Area is about. It's, like I said the other day, it's the new baby in town. It's crying. Everyone's going out to African Continental Free Trade Area baby. Private sector, here and there. SME sector. And now peace and security sector is trying to engage it. So it's kind of the spoiled child now. But there were parents, you know, who had been there long before the African Continental Free Trade Area baby was born. These parents with the AU, been around for about 50 years plus now. We all know how the OAU and the AU integration started and so on, and how now we have very tremendous and formidable peace and security architecture that the AU now possesses. But to the presentation, which I tried to go against form. For me, there are probably three ways in which we can make the African Continental Free Trade Area work. And that's because good things come in threes, but I'd like to add a fourth at the end to tie up the peace and security link. For me, predictable financing is one of them. And here we refer to the Article 19 institutions of the African Union, the African Central Bank, the African Investment Bank, the African Monetary Fund. All of these may be alien to you because they haven't really been set up yet. They're on paper, but these are the three financial institutions that are really supposed to help make the OAU, the AU work. Of course, there is an AU levy now, 0.2%. A couple of countries are paying. Ghana, Kenya, Chad, Rwanda, and so on, but more countries ought to be paying. The second issue for me is about policy coherence. something back home I've disturbed a lot of people's ears by talking about policy coherence, Agenda 2063, Africa governance architecture, the role of APRM, and so on and so forth. I'll try and unpack that in a minute. And then thirdly, sensitization and dissemination. The African Continental Free Trade Area certainly cannot happen if we do not sensitize people. The other day, people were talking about cross-border traders and how they needed to be sensitized and all these things. And I think the bottom line really is that if there's darkness on an issue, you need to put light on it, really. And the same applies to the African Continental Free Trade Area. So let's start with predictable financing. How do we make the African Continental Free Trade Area work with predictable financing? That's a very big question and with very difficult answers. And for me, that would probably end my presentation if I had my way. Sadly, I don't have my way, so you have to bear with me for a few minutes more. Article 19, I refer to it. African Central Bank, African Investment Bank, African Monetary Fund. The crafters of these financial institutions believe that these would be the important tenets through which financing could be raised for the African Union, okay? They have not been working, not because they haven't been set up. The truth is you have organs like the Association of African Central Banks that have been doing good work, sometimes with the IMF, sometimes with other donors, to ensure that there's some level of policy coherence in the conversation on making sure that there's, we work towards these institutions. They have not always been working though. And that's why the AU, in its wisdom, when it decided to have the AU reform back in 2018, felt that, okay, let's do something different. Let's have a levy. This was inspired by the regional level, because at the regional level, in ECOWAS, for example, my region, the reason why ECOWAS seems to be doing so well is because it has some level of predictable financing. Levied over the member states, and it goes into a central bank of each member state, and that is used to prosecute the agenda of ECOWAS through the many institutions that are set up across the region. And we've even gotten to the stage where ECOWAS Parliament now receives, or rather tasks the ECOWAS Commission to ensure that, it's towing the line on the money that is being used. So predictable financing clearly is an important thing. So to the levy, back to the issue of the levy, when the AU reforms took place 2-3 years ago, 2017, the AU levy came out as one important way of ensuring that the AU could now begin to have some level of predictable financing. Some of it has gone to peace support operations and so on, but the idea was to ensure that if all member states are paying the 0.2% levy, that would help wean itself off donors. I'd like to think that this is where we need to go with the African Continental Free Trade Area. We need to get more member states to be paying the levy so that even as we welcome donor support, we also ensure that we have some level of autonomy in the way that we prosecute the work that the African Continental Free Trade Area seeks to do. So that's it with predictable financing. The second issue is of policy coherence. Agenda 2063. Agenda 2063 has 7 aspirations. The 7th aspiration sees the AU as a global player. And frankly, I think it's in consonance with the Tana Forum themes that the AU is and can be a global player, even with all its deficiencies and so on. Now, the African Continental Free Trade Area is probably and arguably one of the most sophisticated flagship projects of its time in living memory that has come to fruition. It is only going to succeed if, in my view, we begin to engage it with some level of policy coherence. Let me explain very briefly. Policy coherence in the sense that we accept the fact that the African Continental Free Trade Area is a flagship project of Agenda 2063, which was formulated back in 2013. But not only do we accept that, we also then go on to believe or go on to understand that there should be some level of rules-based governance around the African Continental Free Trade Area. For a lot of people that I speak to back home in Ghana, they hear about the African Continental Free Trade Area. And some of them, they're, hey, African Continental Free Trade Area, big time for big business, private sector, let's scale up, all these things. Great, that's great. It's time to scale. It's time to do big things. But in my view, we must not get to the stage where big private sector is the only conversation that we have around African Continental Free Trade Area. It's important to have some level of rules-based governance that ensures that we streamline the work that the AU has been doing. So for me, one of them is the work that African governance architecture, for example, has been doing. Things that, I'm sorry I have to single you out, Dr. Mukundi, who used to work with the African governance architecture, if he's around. He used to do some very, very good work with ensuring that the African governance architecture helps speak to the issue of African governance, or at least some level of African governance. So the African governance architecture, in my view, in the conversation on AfCFTA, is about ensuring that some of these institutions that are part of the African governance architecture, that is the Pan-African Parliament, the African Peer Review Mechanism, the African Commission on Human and People's Rights, the AU Anti-Corruption Board, and so on, all do the needful and come together to cohere in favor of some kind of rules-based governance. So when I talk about policy coherence, from my whimsical viewpoint, this is what I'm trying to say, that we still have that conversation with the African governance architecture and the African Continental Free Trade Area to ensure that everyone's on the right footing. Now, I want to segue that to the important role that the African Peer Review Mechanism is playing. Forget the fact that I'm a member of the Communications Network. I don't work for them. I'm only a member of the Communications Network. So I see the benefits that and the demerits sometimes. The African Peer Review Mechanism, in my view, is doing great work. It has an expanded mandate as per the retreat of 2018. Its mandate was expanded, and now, for some of you, you may have been there last year, 2019 Nairobi. There was the African Governance Report, there was a review, and this year they're doing the African Governance Report as well, country missions and all these things. But the African Peer Review Mechanism, the reason why for me, it will need to play an important role in the conversation in the African Continental Free Trade Area is of this new conception that has come about of the state-owned enterprises network. I think they're even having a webinar, I think, in a couple of days' time on this state-owned enterprises network. The whole idea of the state-owned enterprises, an idea inspired by the OECD, and then now it is with the APRM is managing that network, is that the state-owned enterprises network seeks to ensure that there is some kind of ethical and rules-based development, engagement around things like the African Continental Free Trade Area as it begins to work. Because the state-owned enterprises, at the end of the day, even if we have big business and private sector crisscrossing across the continent and regional economic communities doing their thing, we will still have state-owned enterprises seeking to trade. And these state-owned enterprises cannot trade across territories in any way, shape, or form. They need to do it in a rules-based way. So, yes, it's a bit novel, it's a bit innovative, but in my view, it's one thing that we can look out for. And the reason why APRM still is important is also the manner in which the APRM has worked, the historicity, if you will. The APRM predicted the violence in Kenya in 2008. It also predicted the xenophobia in South Africa. Now, through its country reports, we have seen many times that the APRM is doing good work. It has challenges, certainly. Its hashtag is towards universal accession by 2023. Right now, there are about 45 countries that have acceded to the Africa Peer Review Mechanism, which is a voluntary mechanism for member states to sign on to and ensure that they're all towing the line of democratic governance. There's still a lot of work to do, clearly, but the APRM, because of the history that we know and recognize for what it was able to do in predicting these instability, this kind of instability. We saw it with Kenya, and then we saw it in South Africa as well. Thankfully, and also because of its expanded mandate, we now see that it is expanded to becoming an early warning system for peace and security. Sure, I said I would talk about peace and security at the end. I've talked about it a little bit too early, but because of it's important to make that link so that you understand, you can begin to connect the dots about why some of these institutions are being mentioned at the time that I'm mentioning. So that's that with the policy coherence. The third point is on sensitization and dissemination. Like I said, we cannot do the African Continental Free Trade Area, we cannot do justice to it if we do not shed light on it, if we do not give it the necessary appreciation and understanding to ordinary people, to ordinary citizens, to the market women, to the people who are illiterate. They also need to know how the African Continental Free Trade Area works. So some of us have been doing some humble work in the media to ensure that takes place. I host a show, Agenda 2063, on Association of African Universities TV, hoping to contribute to my humble way to that effect, to ensure that people make the link between Agenda 2063, AfCFTA, and then the different strands that are part of it. But recently on our network also, we struck a deal, no money involved yet, with a local radio station, Astasi Radio, where we have a program called Trade Africa. And we started that early this month. And I co-host that with the news editor of the station. And we talk about the African Continental Free Trade Area, its merits, its demerits, what it means for ordinary people, that kind of thing. So we're doing TV and we're doing radio. One of the biggest things that we have on the cards, and we are fast on track of that, is the establishment of a Center for Media Excellence on AfCFTA education. It's one of our priorities for the policy network. And we've made a lot of moves on that with some of our members. So sensitization, I think a lot of you understand it. It's clear, even with the whole peace and security issue, you cannot do without adequate sensitization. But in closing, I'd just like to say that basically, the whole idea of the African Continental Free Trade Area is a novel idea. It's important. It will work if we do the necessary, if we give it the necessary commitment that we need to give, because we can't just leave it to the vagaries of the private sector to deal with it. We need to engage everybody, private sector, public sector, and the AU. And let's not forget, the AU's role in the whole establishment of the African Continental Free Trade Area. The AU is criticized for a whole number of things. But at the end of the day, the African Continental Free Trade Area would not have happened if it were not for the African Union. And it's something that I try to promulgate in different spaces as well. Some people think the African Continental Free Trade Area just dropped out of the sky in a parachute. That's not the case at all. The AU played a critical role. And there's, again, historicity. The Abuja Treaty. I don't want to bore you with history, so I'm not going to do it except to say that in the Abuja Treaty of 1991, which operationalized in 1994, there was an idea to have continental integration in 6 steps, 3 regional, 3 continental. 3 have largely been established or realized, but the 4th one is where we are right at now, where the Continental Free Trade Area is supposed to come to fruition. But before that, in 2015, actually, we had the Tripartite Free Trade Area, where we had COMESA, East Africa Community, and SADC come together. I remember there was a lot of noise in Ghana back at the time. Some of us were on radio being interviewed, and we said, "No, we're so happy, you know, now we have African unity and all these things." The Tripartite Free Trade Area was going to be the precursor to how the Continental Free Trade Area would work. The Tripartite Free Trade Area is not dead because there are some countries accruing benefits from it still, but it has certainly paved the way for how the Continental Free Trade Area works. So, I've been given 1 minute to shut up. So, let me just quickly say that the Continental Free Trade Area is not just a good idea. It isn't just a flagship idea. It is a great idea that if all of us put our hearts into it, whether you're a private sector, public sector, whether you're a peace and security practitioner, whether you're a feminist activist, we can make it work. But let's also be mindful that we need to make it rules-based. Free trade areas all over the world have come up under tremendous criticism in the Americas, in Europe, and so on and so forth. So we need to make it rules-based to make sure that it works for everybody, for the regional economic communities, that interlinkage and all these things. So we are at the right time and the right side of history. What do they call it? Is it the zeitgeist or something? Yeah, we are there. So let's make this work, and let's find the necessary angles, whether it's peace and security, whether it's all these other spaces, to really make the African Continental Free Trade work for all of us, not just a few, but everybody. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bensa, for that. You've emphasized predictable financing as being important for making the AfCFTA work, implementing the AfCFTA. You've mentioned policy coherence, the accountability of African institutions, and you ended up emphasizing the importance of communications, demystifying the AfCFTA. I'll just make a few comments on the predictable financing, because I think it's a very important point. Trade itself currently generates the largest source of resource flows into the continent, and it's about $400 billion a year. And that is much more than, that is more than remittances, ODA, and FDI combined. So clearly, we're going in the right direction by expanding trade, because that is what would ensure sustainable financing. But beyond that, I think the next commission, the AUC, would need to prioritize this issue, because African debt currently stands at $134 billion. It's only a fraction of African GDP, which is $2.5 trillion. But all the same, it's a worrying trend. Global financial markets always put a premium on African bonds. African bonds typically attract a double-digit interest rate, when other countries, including other emerging economies, have much lower interest rates. The issue of the convertibility of our currencies also is another constraint. And so we've seen in this pandemic that whilst other countries have been able to unleash the power of the central banks, literally printing money to fight the pandemic, African countries have not been able to do this because of these sorts of constraints, including non-convertible currencies. So maybe the next commission would need to prioritize these issues of predictable financing. The Tana Forum is known for floating new ideas, and one idea I can float today is the need for a chief economist, the AU Commission, who would coordinate economic policy across the Commission. So you heard it here first, that that is, I think, a gap that we currently have in the Commission. Now, it's my honor to introduce the Trade and Industry Commissioner, Ambassador Mudenda Muchanga, who who previously worked in the Zambian civil service at home and abroad, and as Deputy Executive Secretary of the Southern African Development Community. In his current position, he has provided strategic leadership in facilitating the negotiation, conclusion, and ratification of the agreement establishing the African Continental Free Trade Area, which entered into force on 30th May 2019, and whose operational phase was launched on 7 July 2019. In addition, Ambassador Muchanga has provided similar leadership on matters of trade, industrialization, mining, and customs cooperation. He works with ease at technical, professional, management, leadership, and political levels. Ambassador, it's my great honor to invite you to take the floor.
Thank you very much, Moderator.
Of course, Ambassador Muchanga is with us.
I'm very happy to have been invited by the Tana Forum to speak for this year. This is my second involvement with the Tana Forum, and I'm also very happy to be associated with the distinct panel that has spoken before me. Right from the beginning, I would like to indicate that the African Union Commission, especially the Department of Trade and Industry, has received a significant amount of financial support from the German government and the European Union in support of the African Continental Free Trade Area, and we are most grateful. Now, the topic is making the African Continental Free Trade Area work. In my view, this is an ideological and strategic imperative. The ideological component can be seen in the fact that it gives an opportunity to give practical implementation of the principle of collective self-reliance, which is enshrined in the treaty establishing the African Economic Community, or the Abuja Treaty. And with that, we are pulling our sovereignty. The national sovereignty is being pulled to come up with the pooled sovereignty, which is going to give effect to changes at policy level, even commercial levels. When we have pooled the sovereignty, we are going to create one African market. And this is the vision of the African Continental Free Trade Area. And when we do that, the new domestic market will be the African Continental Free Trade Area. The national market, the regional market, have to give way to the one African market, which is the African Continental Free Trade Area. And it is also a solid foundation to move towards deeper integration. The starting point is the free trade area. Thereafter, we are expected to go into higher levels of integration, including a customs union, a single market, and eventually the African Economic Community, as envisioned under the Abuja Treaty. The strategic imperative can be seen in a number of issues, the first of which is that for the first time in 25 years, African economies are going to go through an economic recession. This can be either a short recession, which results into early recovery, or it can be a deep and sustained recession. And we saw that in the period between 1970 and 1980, when Africa went, the whole developing world went through a commodity and external debt crisis, such that the period of the 1980s was regarded by much of the developing world as the lost decade for development. And in the period 2000 to 2010, if we go through a deep and sustained recession, can translate into a lost decade for Africa. And therefore, we need to make the African Continental Free Trade Area work so that we have a quick recovery. And through that, then you can address some of the problems already emerging as a result of the crisis. One of is reduced economic growth rates. According to the African Development Bank, the average decline in economic growth this year is going to be 1.7%. And when you look at the country performance, some of the countries, one of the countries, we have a negative 58% economic growth, negative economic growth this year. Others are expected to be somewhere around minus 6%. Some of the good performers will register positive growth of about 1.6%. So that is a worrying trend. And the external debt crisis is emerging, and in some countries it's already proving unsustainable. And related to that are the growing unemployment levels, estimated to be around 30 million people this year, as well as deeper poverty levels, estimated to be around 430 million people this year. All this can create social and political tensions. And to avoid that, we must make the African Continental Free Trade Area work. We are working to ensure that it works. Our first priority is to finalize the first phase negotiations, and these are on rules of origin, the tariff concessions, and specific commitments on trade in services. Yesterday, we had a meeting of the senior trade officials, and they're going to present the report to the ministers on the 27th, which is next Tuesday. And the ministers want to put pressure on the negotiators and the senior trade officials. They're going to have 3 meetings before the extraordinary summit on 5th December this year, which is going to receive the final reports. And we target to implement, to roll out the market of the African Continental Free Trade Area on the 1st of January 2021. And there are other instruments that we are using to make sure that the African Continental Free Trade Area works. One of them has already been finalized, and this is the online mechanism on the monitoring, reporting, and elimination of non-tariff barriers. You can eliminate tariffs, but non-tariff barriers can emerge. And this instrument is already operational. People can visit at www.tradebarriers.africa. And it's going to be handed over to the Secretary General of the African Continental Free Trade Area at the extraordinary summit. We're also encouraging member states at national level to establish and operationalize national committees. The issue of sensitization came up. It is through these national committees that we can bring the African Continental Free Trade Area closer to the people. And the terms of reference for these national committees have been given to each and every member state, and they're expected to draw representation from the executive, as well as the legislative wings of government, the private sector, the women, the youth, the cross-border traders, the labor movement, academia, among others. So it's very much an involving process. And again, at the national level, we are encouraging each and every member states to have national implementation strategies of the African Continental Free Trade Area. And that is going to generate policy coherence, such that the national policies will be fully aligned to the continental policies. So at the national level, we are encouraging all the member states to come up with sensitization programs to the African private sector, so that they are aware of the emerging market and the opportunities that it offers to each and every one of them, so that they can plan to scale up investments. And we are also encouraging member states to come up with the production of trade documents, which are going to facilitate the trade. And the template exists in one of the agreements on trade in goods. All it requires is the national flag and the appropriate security features. And to this end, we are planning in December, immediately after the extraordinary summit, to have a meeting of Directors General of Africa, so that they can familiarize themselves with the national trade documents of each and every member state. At the regional level, as interim secretariat, we recommended to the Secretariat of the African Continental Free Trade Area that they approach each and every regional economic community to feature the flag or the logo of the African Continental Free Trade Area in their trade documents. That way, we'll be promoting trade across regions. Research findings from the African Trade Center provide that as of now, much of intra-African trade is within regions, not across regions. So when we bring those trade documents at that level, regional level, it will be possible to promote trade across regions. So this is the work that is going on. Then at the continental level, we are also, as part of the process of sensitization, around the 30th of November this year, we are going to have a meeting bringing together the ministers responsible for trade, investment, and industry, together with the African private sector. And we plan it to be a two-way conversation. The first part, the ministers are going to roll out to the private sector the preparations that have been made to ensure that they are able to participate in this large market of 1.27 billion people. And in return, we expect the African private sector to communicate or indicate to the ministers the plans that they have to ensure that they are able to scale up investments across Africa. Right now, the picture is not very good. When you look at investments flows into Africa, 12% is made up of investments from the African private sector. And you compare that to Asia, which is 33%. So the scope for growth is very much there. And this is one of the issues that we are bringing up to the private sector. They need to scale up investments. And that also comes in the face of the fact that immediately the COVID-19 pandemic broke out. There was a flight of capital from all the emerging markets, almost all the emerging markets. It went to what were regarded as safe havens. And even then, they did not invest that money in the stock exchanges. They invested that money in gold holdings. And that's why among the commodities, the only commodity that seems to be doing very well is gold. And therefore, if Africa has to recover very fast, we are going to need a lot of investments from the African private sector. We are going to require a lot of investments from the African pension funds and sovereign wealth funds. When you look at the pension funds and sovereign wealth funds, right now they are earning negative interest on their holdings abroad. Why don't they bring them to the African Continental Free Trade Area, which is providing better returns? Another area where we need to make sure that the African Continental Free Trade Area works is the principle of inclusiveness. Should be a win-win outcome. If others lose, there will be no political commitment to the African Continental Free Trade Area. And the number of levers that we're applying to ensure that it's a win-win outcome. One of them is the national committees, which I already talked about. The other one is we are going to create the adjustment facility, African Continental Free Trade Area Adjustment Facility. And we're working with the African Export-Import Bank right now to draw up the Articles of Association. But as an interim measure, the African Export-Import Bank has provided financing of $1 billion for countries that may need immediate assistance. And this will be on commercial terms, so they'll be able to negotiate between those countries interested and the bank itself. Then the other lever is the issue of the other issue of inclusiveness is the question of promoting inclusive industrialization. Because for the African Continental Free Trade Area, each country should be able, for it to work, each country should be able to export something to the rest of Africa. In this regard, we have worked with the UNIDO to come up with a regional value chain mapping exercise. We hope that can be concluded before the end of the year. And when that is done, we'll be able to know what each African country can export to the rest of Africa, either at final goods or intermediate goods categories. And we will also use that to promote to promote investments in the respective countries around the region. So that's the process of inclusiveness that we are promoting through the African Continental Free Trade Area. Payments and settlements are also a key feature of ensuring that the African Continental Free Trade Area works. If traders do not get paid on time and in full, they will lose confidence in the market. And in order to ensure that that does not happen, again, we are working with the African Export-Import Bank to come up with a Pan-African digital payments and settlement system. And this will be done in such a way that the daily settlements will be in local currency, and at an agreed period of time, they're going to be net settlements in foreign exchange. And it will have a universal coverage. The African Export-Import Bank is willing to provide a $3 billion guarantee, such that those countries that fail to meet their net foreign exchange settlements can have recourse to that amount of money. And work is underway now to roll out a pilot phase of the scheme in the West African Monetary Zone. And $500 million have been provided to ensure that it works. And when the results show that it can work very, very well, then it's going to be rolled out across Africa. So I can go on and on, but I would like to respect the time limit. And there's no way the moderator can send a note to me other than muting me. So I'll stop here and wait for any conversation that may emerge from the presentation. Once again, thank you for the invitation.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Muchanga, for that intervention. I think it has been wide-ranging in terms not only of giving an update on where we are in regard to implementation of the AfCFTA, but also by looking and emphasizing that there is an ideological element to the AfCFTA in terms of the way that Africans look at the AfCFTA. And here I can confirm that ECA and the Rockefeller Foundation undertook a survey of Africans. I believe about 1,000 Africans were interviewed, 2,000 Africans interviewed in this survey in 2018 across 42 countries, and about 77% were strongly in favor of the AfCFTA. So I think that ideological aspect is very clear. Ambassador Muchanga reminded us about the strategic issues that are at stake, especially since Africa is currently in a recession, and also with an emerging debt crisis on our hands. Unemployment levels are high. There is a risk of social and political tensions as a result. But all the same, he was clear that the AfCFTA is a strategic response to these challenges, that efforts are being made to finalize the negotiations. Only yesterday, senior trade officials were meeting, he said. Then also, he underscored that at the country level, there's expectation that national committees would be established to implement the AfCFTA at country level. He mentioned the importance of national implementation strategies at country level. Here I could just add that ECA is working with 36 countries on these national implementation strategies. He mentioned the engagement between the AfCFTA Secretariat and the RECs to facilitate trading across and between the RECs. And like the previous speaker, Mr. Benser, he underscored the importance of the financial issues, including the need to scale up investment from the private sector, that especially also in this COVID crisis, we've seen capital flight as another challenge. that the pension funds, African pension funds, a source that could be tapped for investments, for the financial aspects. And then he ended up by talking about inclusiveness, that this is very important for the AfCFTA to work, that the AfCFTA should be win-win. Here I could just add parenthetically that again, analytical work at ECA does suggest that if fully implemented, the AfCFTA actually will be, could provide a win-win outcome for all African countries, least developed and developing, agricultural producing countries, those with manufacturing capacities, etc. I think the evidence is very clear. And Commissioner Muchanga ended by emphasizing also the need for the adjustment to support countries that need adjustment, and mentioned the role of the AfCFTA Bank in this regard, the importance of inclusive industrialization through value chains and the work that is going on in this area as well, and also a payment system that the AfCFTA Bank is helping to put in place to make it easier for all to trade at different levels. So once again, Ambassador Muchanga, thank you very much for your intervention. I think you've shed a lot of light on these issues of implementation. Now we have several questions, and we only have about 15 minutes or so for interventions that have been proposed. First, I'd like to call on the head of the Bangladesh embassy to Ethiopia to make a brief intervention for a couple of minutes. Mr. Tariq Hassan, you have the floor, sir. Oh, it's no longer, okay. Then we have several questions that have been sent. The first one is for Mr. Chen. And the question is, when talking about the AfCFTA within the framework of migration, what is your take and opinion on the effect of AfCFTA in single states' internal migration? If a certain part of the state is reaping the benefit, migration is bound to happen, and this has a ripple effect. What do you make of this? You could respond. Yeah, please come to the podium, please. You do not have a microphone.
I'm not sure I have the question.
Oh, the question. Yeah. Okay, let me repeat it. The question is, within the framework of migration, what is your take and opinion on the effect of the AfCFTA in individual states' internal migration? If a certain part of the state is reaping the benefit, migration is bound to happen, and this has a ripple effect. What do you make of this? It's a bit of a complicated question. But I think what the inquiry is asking is for your opinion on the effect of migration on the AfCFTA.
Okay, I'm not sure I fully understand the question, but I'll attempt a response based on what I suspect the person might be trying to get at. If we look at it optimistically, there's likely to be more deliberateness on the part of African member states to embrace free movement, to embrace migration, if there is then the benefits accruing to that state in terms of AfCFTA. So I think if states understand that an operationalized AfCFTA will mean lower barriers to free movement, we are likely to see some easing of barriers to free movement on the continent. Again, I'm not quite sure about certain parts benefiting. I think the questioner was alluding to certain parts of a state benefiting. I'm not sure I fully understand that, so I can't respond.
It's not very clear, but I think we can leave it at that for now. I will read out the questions and give every panelist an opportunity to make an intervention. What can Africans do to develop the culture of trading among themselves? is one. Another one is what is the best approach for youth of Africa to finance their engagement in the AfCFTA, because this issue of financing is urgent. Another question is building on what Mr. Benser has shared on the need to sensitize the AfCFTA, in addition to communication strategies, what other strategies can be employed at grassroots to ensure better understanding of the AfCFTA and the free movement protocol? Then another question is, what is the African Union doing to ensure that African Caribbean states are not excluded from the AfCFTA? Yeah, I think these are the main questions. So not in any order, I would suggest that take any of these questions, any insights that you'd like to share, and please also make it your closing statement as well. So please intervene and then wrap up, and we'll go in the order in which we started. So we'll start with Mr. Chieng, Ambassador, Mr. Benser, and then Ambassador Muchanga will close the session. Sure. So please, your responses as and insights as you can.
Okay. Perhaps I'll start with that last question on what more can be done to inculcate a culture of trading on the continent. And I think a lot of that was covered by my brother here from the AfCFTA connected NGO, Emmanuel. I think there is a sense in which there's need for Africa to believe more in the Africa brand. And COVID-19, the COVID-19 pandemic, I think, was very interesting in some of its revelations. There was a point in this pandemic where there was a big push for repurposing local industries to produce PPE. And there was reluctance among many Africans to source PPE locally, believing that the best PPE comes from outside of the continent. And that is not just limited to the issue of PPE. We see it across the board. There isn't that belief in made in Africa. And there will need to be a shift if AfCFTA is to really work and people are to take pride in buying made in Ghana, made in Zimbabwe, as opposed to imported from I should be very careful with Stefan sitting next to me, but yeah, I think you get the message there. I really think Pan-Africanism would also imply... Yes.
Each country held on to their own PPE, yes.
I think Pan-Africanism at a certain point will need to imply a certain degree of pride in being African and in buying made in Africa. As part of my closing comments, I'll just say, make 2 points. One is that trade, migration, and cross-border mobility are inherently intertwined. And we know that operationalizing the AfCFTA will be complex, as discussions over the course of this week have revealed. But I think we equally know what those challenges are and what the solutions are. So I don't think we should be daunted by these challenges. We should address them one after another and get on with it, really. There will not be a perfect moment at which to start. And I think one of the... there's a lot of advantages in having these sorts of discussions where you bring to bear issues from related policy sectors as you deliberate on solutions, in this instance, on AfCFTA. But the downside is that sometimes it seems too overwhelming to even begin to tackle. So I would hope that a key takeaway from Tana Forum 2020 is not that there's such insurmountable barriers to operationalizing the AfCFTA, rather that this, the discussions that have taken place over the course of this week revealed that there are barriers and obstacles that we're aware of, and these are the possible solutions to addressing them. One thing I haven't heard enough of this week is climate change. I don't know whether it came up in some of the discussions I didn't listen in on, but I think one of the most important factors in any peace and security discussion on this continent would have to be the impact of climate change and the struggles for ever-dwindling natural resources that is likely to provoke, and the massive disorderly, I hate to say, cross-border movement in search of resources. If there is one single issue that is likely to negatively impact peace and security prospects on the continent, it is climate change. And I think we need to factor that into all of these discussions. Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator. I'll stop at that.
Thank you too, Mr. Cheng, for that. And the last point on climate change, I think, is a very important point. The AfCFTA itself is an opportunity for green growth strategies to be pursued. Ambassador, you have the floor, sir.
Thank you very much, Dr. Luke. I'll take the question, what can the AU do, to promote trade on the African continent? I think that trade is extremely important given the limited budgetary means we have at our disposal, and also given that the monetary policy is already very, very much at ease. So trade is, in my view, one of the only means really left to boost development and economic growth in countries. So this is why I think it is so important to have this AfCFTA, which came into force, and it is now so important to implement it. And there are two things which I would like to say when it comes to implementation, which I haven't said yet in my speech. The first one is we need a strong AU Commission. The EU in Europe, the EU Commission, has been the driver of the integration process in Europe and has seen to it that the single market is implemented and that member states who do not abide by the rules and regulations of the single market are then taken to court, more or less. I'm not saying that the EU Commission should do the same, but what I want to say is that we need a strong EU Commission to see to it that the rules and regulations of the free trade agreement are implemented, and implemented also in an ambitious way. And not, for instance, take rules of origin. If you do it too strict, you will end up with the situation as you have it now. So you should also implement it ambitiously and check that it is well implemented as well. The second point I would like to make is, given that trade is one of the last instruments we have at our disposal at the moment to boost economic growth, is that we need to attract private investments from abroad, from here, from everywhere. Private investments are very important. And for that, we need to create the conducive environment to attract private investment. At the same time, we should be also careful not to compete in social or environmental dumping, so that we have and respect social standards. I think this is extremely important, because only if you do respect social standards, if you do respect environmental protectionist measures, then you will have a sustainable development. I think other pathways will fail. And this is exactly what the Agenda 2030 tells us.
Thank you, Ambassador. I think those points are very clear. A strong EU Commission that is ambitious in terms of its approach to implementation, private investment, an issue that Ambassador Muchanga also underscored. They need to scale up investment, and also that investment should speak to social standards, environmental standards, and so on. Very important point. Mr. Benson, sir.
Yes, I have a quick message to the youth.
Thankfully, I've left the youth bracket so I can criticize them freely. Yeah, okay. So the point is this, to the youth out there listening. Look, the African Continental Free Trade Area is an opportunity for you, not necessarily to scale up, but to stop relying on your parents. You've been talking a lot about entrepreneurship and SMEs and all these things. Your parents are doing the best to look after you, but also take the advantage that you can now that the African Continental Free Trade Area is here to stop putting everything on your parents, because now you have a bigger market out there. You have the regional market, you have the larger continental market as well. So find something to do, something that interests you, that you are passionate about, that you can do so that you can also help complement and you can also add value to the family unit in which you are in. Value, let me stick with that quickly. At the end of the day, the African Continental Free Trade Area is really about value addition. You know, the rules of origin that allow the Continental Free Trade Area to work includes the fact that you need to do something, add value to it. Whether it's cocoa, you add value to it. Whether it's the carpets, the beautiful carpets that we see here, what do you do to these carpets that we see here to add value to it so you can sell? And this is a message to my Ethiopian brothers. The beautiful leather bags that we have as part of Tana Forum, what can you do in addition to it being bags so that you can do cross-border trading to the IGAD region? I'm very happy to be among great minds in a region which I really respect. And as someone who quite enjoys the comparative regionalism, I see that IGAD has made a lot of strides towards becoming what some may call a security community. It's done a lot of good work on conflict transformation and all these things, and it's even work looking at a freedom of movement. In the IGAD region, Eritrea is the last man standing that has not neither signed nor ratified the Continental Free Trade Area. I'd like to take this opportunity to encourage the youth that are in Eritrea to remind themselves that cross-border trading is a critical part of what will make the Continental Free Trade Area work. As well as cross-border trading also helps inhibit peace and security tensions as well. When you're doing cross-border trading, like my grandmother was doing across in Ghana and Togo, it brings people together because you'd rather sell things rather than, you'd prefer to sell goods, whether it's trinkets or whatever, rather than pick up arms. So another pet project of mine, AMISOM. As AMISOM begins to draw down in November 2021, whether it's Kenya Defense Forces, whether it's Somalia, whichever forces, the troop contributing countries that are going to come out of, let's bear in mind that before that drawdown happens for AMISOM, the youth can begin mobilizing their constituents, everybody that, look, let's do a few things. Let's do cross-border trading. Let's start putting pressure on the people to ensure that Eritrea signs and ratifies the Continental Free Trade Area. Let's make sure that these things are done in a way that it inures to the benefit of peace and stability within the IGAD region. The IGAD region is a very beautiful region that needs to continue that stability efforts, those stability efforts that it's been doing. So thank you very much. Those are my final parting words.
Thank you, Mr. Benser. Your message is very clear to the youth and also
Thank you
the
very
youth of Eritrea.
much. Thank you very much.
Finally,
Thank you very much. I'll be very brief and address some of the questions which you were raised. The first one is the culture of trading. When you look at the process of economic development across the world, you find that gradually countries consume more domestically manufactured goods than imported goods. Right now in Africa, the trade balance is always negative because we're importing a lot of manufactured goods. And hence the need to scale up manufacturing across Africa. And one of them, like I indicated, is mindset change. We need to see the African Continental Free Trade Area as the domestic market for Africa. In addition to that, we need to remove potentialities of technical barriers to trade. And to this end, we are going to take to the next meeting of the Specialized Technical Committee of Ministers of Industry, Trade and Mining, the African Quality Policy. And if it adopted by the summit in February 2021, we're going to come up with the Made in Africa standard. That way, we'll be able to harmonize quality standards across the region, and we'll be able to remove technical barriers to trade. But more fundamentally, the Africans must believe in themselves, and they must really believe in the products that are manufactured in Africa. The issue of financing is very, very important, and I think it was answered in the presentation. Or I can indicate that right now, the president of Ghana has been appointed as the champion or leader on African financial institutions. These are the African Central Bank, the African Monetary Fund, and the African Investment Bank, as well as the Pan-African Stock Exchange. As we go towards the new commission, in order to scale up investments from Africa, either the current president or another head of state will be given the title of champion or leader on the mobilization of investments across Africa, so that we interest the African private sector, the pension funds, and the national sovereign wealth funds to really invest their money in Africa. The issue of bringing the African continental free trade to their grassroots was also touched in the presentation through the establishment of the national committees. Over and above that, the summit has inaugurated 7th of July each year as the Africa Integration Day, where people across Africa and in their diaspora should really reflect on how they are contributing to the process of African integration and how they are benefiting to the process. Unfortunately, this year we had the COVID-19. It was not possible to have it at the national level, but we commemorated it at the continental level, and we had 3,000 participants in a virtual platform. We hope next year we'll be able to bring it to the grassroots. One of the ideas which I proposed, but the ministers found it to be very expensive, was to create officers of chief implementers of the African Continental Free Trade Area at each national level, paid for by the Secretariat of the African Continental Free Trade Area. These officers would be able to provide all manner of information at the national level to all stakeholders. But the member states found it a little bit expensive, and it has been put on hold. The diaspora is very, very important. And we have not forgotten the members of the African diaspora. Right now, we've got what we call the African Medical Supplies Platform, where we are able to procure medical supplies to fight the COVID pandemic. And some members of the Caribbean states have applied to be part of that platform, and we have warmly welcomed them. They are able to use that. Over and above that, we've got what we call the African Business Forum. And we invite members from the Caribbean community, we invite members from the US diaspora and the Canadian diaspora. And one of the members of the Canadian diaspora has in fact gone a step further by inaugurating the Sokuku e-commerce platform. Sokuku means common market in Swahili or Arabic. And that platform is going to create about 600,000 small and medium enterprises between now and 2023 and generate about 3 million jobs. So they are part of the process, and we are fully involving them. By way of closing, I indicate that it has been a very insightful presentation. I could not participate physically because I'm in Zambia. I've got an urgent family matter related to an illness. So I had to travel to one of the districts in Zambia, Choma, where the person is quite sick. But through this virtual engagement, I've learned quite a lot. And the Tana Forum, I think, is playing a very, very strategic role in ensuring that we really generate information that is going to assist the progress and peace and security of Africa. Once again, thank you for the invitation.
Thank you too, Commissioner Muchanga, for these final remarks, and we all wish you safe travels. So, ladies and gentlemen, we've come to the end of our program. Just join me in thanking Maureen Achieng, Ambassador Awa, Mr. Bensa, and Commissioner Muchanga for these very insightful presentations and remarks. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator, and thank you to the esteemed panel. My sincere apologies. We are running a little bit behind schedule, and therefore I think we will take our break as we start the next session, and we will dive straight into it. So I would call the moderator, Chris Maroleng, to come and join us on the platform. I will also call on Dr. Jonas to come and join us. I acknowledge the presence of the Foreign Minister, His Excellency Getu Andarcho, who is also here with us. Excellency, if you could also join us at the high table, please. And I would also call upon Ms. Samiha Abdul Malik, who would be making a tribute to the former director, to come and join us on the high panel. As we are beginning, I think I would have a quick introduction for Mr. Maroleng, who will take over the closing ceremony. Chris is the Executive Director of the Good Governance Africa. Chris has worn several hats in his life, including working with the Institute for Security Studies, but more so also as the Chief Operating Officer for the South African Broadcasting Corporation. Chris is going to be our moderator for the next session and also would be guiding us throughout the closing ceremony and the sessions. Chris.
Good afternoon, everybody. Let me begin by recognizing the Foreign Minister of the Federal Democratic Republic of Ethiopia, His Excellency Gedu Andragechu, and we thank you and acknowledge your presence here for coming. I'd also, as I introduce myself, also recognize Her Excellency Me Bokholo Joy Kenwendo, who is the Managing Director of Kenwendo Advisory and former Minister of Investment, Trade and Industry in Botswana, who will be joining us on the line. I also would like to recognize joining us in this closing panel, but also remotely will be Philip Getongo, who has been the rapporteur of the whole session of the AfCFTA, Revitalizing Pan-Africanism for Sustainable Peace and Development in Africa. Before I begin, let me just say and introduce myself. My name is Chris Maroleng, and as was indicated, I am the Executive Director of Good Governance Africa, which is a think tank that is based in Johannesburg, South Africa. And certainly my presence here today is really to try and bring together what has been discussed over a period of about 5 days as we were conceptualizing what it actually means to revitalize Pan-Africanism using this continental free trade agreement that we're talking about today. And indeed, as we think about this, an African idiom comes to mind, which really talks about the need for us to unify and come together. It is said by elders that if you want to go fast, Your Excellency, go by yourself. But if you want to go far, go together. And certainly the idea around the continental free trade agreement, continental free trade area as an idea is one that is really premised on the fact and the idea that together as Africa, focused on our trade, focused on economies of scale, focused on ensuring that our regional economic communities acting in an integrated fashion can really move this needle of enhancing trade across this continental free trade area and indeed through the agreement. I think one of the key things as I begin to invite my distinguished colleagues to come and give you some key takeaways about what we're discussing is really just to give you a sense of some of the issues that, in my mind, have really characterized some of the key touch points that we were talking about today. Some of these talk about the issue of how this nexus between security and free trade and movement of people can be reconciled. Can we establish an effective platform where the two are not seen as mutually exclusive, but necessary for us in order to implement this continental free trade area? The other aspect really talks about the aspect of sovereignty and our understanding of what it means in terms of ensuring this movement of people. I referred to this earlier around economies of scale and the need for us really to focus very clearly on ensuring that these economies of scale in terms of logistics infrastructure, integrated networks, really allow the sum total of what will be the free trade area under this continental free trade agreement effectively are operationalized. Having said so, I think one of the key things that we say and what has been pointed out consistently, Your Excellency, Foreign Minister, has been the fact that if this is going to be effective, we need to ensure an effective governance system, a regulatory framework that allows for this free trade area to engage. But if I go back to my opening remarks, which were to say that if we want to go far with this, if we want to implement and see the effective creation of this continental free trade agreement and area here on our continent, there are a few practical steps that we must realize. And these practical steps talk to financing. These practical steps talk to how we create and establish a sustainable framework, not just from a financial perspective, but really from a perspective that says, is there consistency and coherence in the policy frameworks that underpin this free trade area? Can this consistency and coherence be taken forward into a situation where we see ultimately this idea that is based on pragmatic Pan-Africanism actually taking root on the African continent? What I describe as Pan-African pragmatism goes beyond the veil of symbolism, but it talks about how we as Africans ultimately ensure the long-term sustainability of trade, free movement and engagement of our people, geared towards ensuring that Africa's renaissance, Africa's growth and development is no more just a figment of our imagination, symbolized by chants and symbolic war cries that talk about what Pan-Africanism is, but this Pan-African pragmatism must be based on effective development of our continent. Your Excellency, over the past few days, my colleagues and I, both here in this room and indeed in other parts of the continent, joining us through technology, have said one of the key things that will allow Africa to leapfrog and to begin to be a disruptor within this question of trade and development is really our ability to utilize technology, to pivot and use digital means to ensure that Africa itself takes its place as not just an equal partner, but the largest trading area in the world. It is not just the largest trading area in the world, but it is a trading area that is endowed with myriad of resources, both human capital, natural resources, that can form the basis of the creation of this free trade area. I can go on, Your Excellency, but in the interest of time, what I will do today is give an opportunity for our technical colleagues to connect with us on the line. Joining us is Mr. Philip Gitongo, who has been the rapporteur. And the idea about asking the rapporteur to discuss with me today is really to engage in what we describe as a quick fire conversation, a fireside conversation, where in 5 minutes, he'll hopefully be able to give us an executive summary of what was discussed. But more importantly, allow me maybe about 10 minutes to also engage him in a few questions. And certainly, I hope he's joining us on the line. Philip,
yes, moderator.
Gitongo,
Good afternoon.
Do we
Can
have
you
you
hear
on the
me
line?
quite clearly? Hello, can you hear me?
Joining us, and greetings to you this afternoon. What I have done in your absence is given a very high-level summary of some of the key takeouts of what we've been discussing today. But I'd like to hand over to you and invite you to give us, in 5 minutes, an executive summary of the deliberations that we've had over about 5 days, so that we can really try and compress in the space of those few minutes some of the key takeouts. Please go ahead.
Thank you, moderator.
My
and
brother,
greetings,
Gitongo.
everybody from Nairobi, where I'm based at the moment, having traveled from Djibouti. I hope you're all well in Addis and everywhere else around the world. I want to start my comments on this summary by echoing one of the proverbs that the moderator has just shared, or rather a variation of it, that when we're together, we will go. If you want to go far, you go together. If you want to go quickly, you go alone. I sense that that is more or less a call to unity. And in Africa, we have very many sayings that reflect this sentiment, one of which is when the ants work together, they will bring down the elephant. So I believe the elephant that we Africans, as ants, are attempting to grapple with is the elephant of poverty, the elephant of underdevelopment, the elephant of conflict. And I believe that by working together, using the free trade agreement as one of the instruments or one of the strings that we can tie down the elephant, we shall overcome. Now, in the last 5 days, there have been a lot of discussions. There have been 14 sessions in all. And across those sessions, there was quite a lot of consensus, but there were also areas of conflict. And to just give you a snapshot of the findings that we've managed to bank so far, I will share with you 7 key findings, one for each day of the week, so to speak, on this high-level forum on security in Africa, and the role that the continental free trade area can play in revitalizing Pan-Africanism for sustainable peace and development. The first finding is that there was consensus that the continental free trade area is a massive achievement. We achieved it in just 5 years, when we have many other processes that have taken a lot longer to achieve. Some are still in development. If you compare the continental free trade area with the similar frameworks around the world, they may have taken a lot longer to realize. But also we may have had the benefit of learning lessons from what works and what doesn't from other parts of the world. This continental free trade area, should we be able to roll it out, is a key plank in the Agenda 2063 for our continent. which is not so far away. It's only 43 years away. But as has been noted, the agreement is, for now, an agreement in principle. It is a statement of intent. And therefore, it is very important for us to put in place the implementing conditions that would make it a reality. One of them is, of course, the free movement of persons. That protocol, so far, I believe, to the best of my knowledge, has only 4 ratifications. It's still got a long way to go, and yet it is a key enabling instrument for the continental free trade area. The other issue is that we also need to work on peace and stability, on infrastructure, and coordination of the regional economic communities. We need to have some degree of cohesion in how we roll out the continental free trade area. So that's a high-level snapshot. The second finding is that we must find ways of integrating without the loss of identity. And I believe the moderator did make allusions to this in his opening remarks, the issue of sovereignty and the issue of cybersecurity. And the question of sovereignty then would be, how do we envision or understand the concept of sovereignty? Is it political self-determination, as in the classic sense? Or do we want to look at it from a different perspective in terms of trade, the social aspect, and the cultural aspects of sovereignty? And therefore, in this case, if we are to do so, what it means is that perhaps what we would need to protect, for instance, is our cultural sovereignty, that we can't have a continental free trade area without losing our Africanness, without necessarily globalizing and becoming the same or as homogeneous as the world is becoming. The third finding is that multilateralism works. It does work, and it needs to keep working. We have seen that in this time of the COVID pandemic, and also other transnational threats that affect our continent, desert locusts, floods, transnational terrorism, we would need to keep working together if we are to overcome this problem. And this is where indeed that wisdom of our forefathers on unity comes into play. It was noted that the borders that we have in Africa, some of our states, they are artificial borders, and they did not take into cognizance the organic and the natural synergies that exist. And what we need to do then to overcome that political line in the sand is to find ways to work around it without necessarily erasing it. But we also need to be very, very careful in how we roll out our multilateral approaches and how we implement the continental free trade area. History showed that as countries reduced tariffs on one hand, they increased taxes on the other. And therefore, in a manner of speaking, we are robbing Peter to pay Paul. And this is something that we would need to be alive to going forward. The fourth finding is that the continental free trade area provides a platform for unified trade negotiation, for us, Africa, as a continent to speak with one voice. Our population is 1.3 billion people, which is the equivalent of China. It is 4 times bigger than the United States, 6 times bigger than Europe, I believe. But our economies are just as smaller by the same proportion. Our economy is 4 times smaller than Europe and 6 times smaller than that of the United States. So in order for us to be able to have a voice and be able to effectively negotiate on global platforms, we would need to be able to speak together, and the continental free trade area provides us a megaphone with which we can do that. The fifth finding is that we must address the political, the economic, and the social obstacles that are encumbering our countries. And this is for the continental free trade area to have evenly distributed benefits. Not all countries are starting off on the same footing. And this is not a new phenomenon. When the European Union was coming together, you would see that some countries had an advantage over others, but they found ways to work around that through either a graduated mechanism of integration, a certain degree of protection that would then certainly be be removed after a number of years. And these are things that we would need to consider. But for us, our problems are bigger. Yes.
Sorry, Philip. Apologies, Philip. We are slightly over the 5 minutes that we allocated for you to engage with us. Do you mind just summarizing your last key takeouts?
So having dealt with the inequalities amongst our states, the next finding was that that is number 6. We must make the continental free trade area a green, or we must make it green, must make it sensitive to environmental concerns. And the 7th finding is that we must make it debt neutral. We cannot have a situation where the cure is worse than the disease, that we find our countries are economically worse off with the continental free trade area than they are with it. There are quite a number of other issues under the finding number 5 that I will expound upon when you put the questions to me, Mr. Moderator. Over to you.
Thank you so much for your very concise and in-depth executive summary of what happened. Let me just probe you on something that was raised by my other big brother, Dr. Jonas, the director of the Institute for Peace and Security Studies, who is really our host today. And he asked the question, this issue of economic integration really of Africa is swiftly colliding with a question around national security, around security of the state in Africa. How do we, what did the participants say with regards to the reconciliation of free movement, softening possibly of sovereignty, and the idea of developing this continental free trade area?
That was something that was
how do we reconcile it?
Addressed in the last panel on the issue of free movement. There was a very, very clear statement that was said that free movement does not mean open borders. Free movement does not mean unregulated movement. Free movement means that what we're actually doing is strengthening our systems so that the movement is more legal, more orderly, and more regular. So that then it's able to, countries are able to keep track of who's coming in and who's going out, and the economic value that they're indeed adding to them.
On your reflections, just very quickly, could you also give us a sense about what some of the key finance institutions, structures, and agreements that have been put into place with regards to the implementation of the CFTA? What did the deliberations over the 4 days
one of the key
in terms of
findings
those modalities?
Was that, of course, we would need to strengthen the Economic and Social Council at the AU. That's a very, very critical thing that we must do, so that then we can have an overarching framework within which economic policy for the continent can be formulated and negotiated. Then below that, then we'd be able to strengthen the financial institutions that would then be able to drive the different, the continental fiscal and monetary policy that would facilitate the benefits that we are seeking from the continental free trade area.
Can you also give us a sense of some of the regulatory challenges that will that we might face and what was discussed with regards to regulation? I'm particularly passionate about this as a governance practitioner on the African continent. What did the conference
question
say
of regulation, I would answer that in 2 parts,
regulation?
at the regional level and at the national level. First of all, the question of governance in and of itself, the effectiveness of governance, so that then we are able to effectively enforce whatever regulations that would be put in place, is something that was raised as a gap. The other issue with regard to regulation at the regional level is that we do have a lot of disharmony, so to speak, within the regional economic communities. And therefore, you'd find that we would need to sit down and have complementary policies across the communities. We need to consider currency harmonization at some point so that then we're able to reap the maximum benefits from the continental free trade area.
Just as we conclude and as we sum up and kind of bring together some of the key takeouts of this discussion on the continental free trade area, one of the most striking things for me has been that most of the delegates who were here today really talked about Pan-Africanism, yes, but they seem to be talking about a Pan-Africanism that is founded on pragmatism. How do you reconcile the idea of Pan-Africanism with the question of national interest? And here, I want you to talk to us a little bit maybe about this contradiction that exists on how do we substitute income and revenues that are raised from duties and tariffs, and where will the nation or where will the states that form the free trade area find these alternatives?
Indeed, this was an issue that was raised, and it was brought very, very clearly to the fore that traditionally, as we had mentioned earlier, countries began substituting taxes for tariffs. And as we go forward and as we begin to open up our borders, the question of how they can be able to sustain some of their revenues is an issue that is still an open question. One of the key recommendations that was made was value addition. Value addition for in terms of building the manufacturing and service sectors would be one of the very quick ways that the low-hanging fruits that countries would be able to gain more from their economies.
My brother Philip, let me ask you just in 1 minute to give us your final closing remark, and then we will then
okay,
move
by way
on
of
to
closing,
our
there
presenter.
is one
Over to
thing
you,
that
Philip.
we would want to highlight is that the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement must be a people-centered agreement. It means that we must put communities that are usually marginalized, like the youth and women, at the forefront of it. They constitute more than half the population. It was also noted that in order for us to realize the objectives of this free trade, it will take 1 generation, that is 50 years. That means it's by 2070, which means that the owners, the real owners of the AfCFTA are people like my young son, who's only 3 years old. He'll become the owner of this thing. So these are the people that we really need to invest in and calibrate the entire framework around. I thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Philip Kitongo, thank you so much. And we really appreciate your very keen insight and ability to compress what were very complex issues that were raised. Your Excellency, Foreign Minister, as you can see, the deliberations over the past 4 days have been intense. They have been pragmatic. They have been led with a focus on what it will take to implement this. We've also tried to bring together questions around this matter of how we collide questions of security and at the same time questions of trade liberalization within a free trade area. Technical team, I'm going to now try and get on our line from Botswana, Her Excellency Me Bogolo Joy Kenewendo, who is the Managing Director of Kenewendo Advisory, and indeed the former Minister of Investment, Trade and Industry in Botswana. A very distinguished lady, and I will not try and compress her very impressive CV into one. Me Kenewendo, are you with us today?
Can you hear me?
We can indeed, Your Excellency. Thank you so much for joining us today. It is a privilege for us to have you as part of our closing takeouts. We have today in the room that I am a very distinguished group, including His Excellency Gedu Andra Gachu, who is the Minister of Foreign Affairs. Apologies for the pronunciation. And indeed, a number of excellencies and distinguished dignitaries who have been over the 4 or 5 days deliberating on the implementation of this Africa Continental Free Trade Area. And we're really glad to bring you into the conversation today. And I'll just give you 5 minutes, Your Excellency, if you don't mind, to give us a sense of the key takeaways that you have around the implementation.
Thank you very much,
of the
Chris, and a very good afternoon once again to all the excellencies in Addis. I must say I'm a little jealous that you're all there and we are still here with our borders closed, but I'm hopeful that very soon we'll be able to travel and we will meet and rejoice at once. I want to start off by thanking the and congratulating organizers and especially talk about the AfCFTA, because it would be a shame for us to stop talking about during when we have gained over the past couple of years in driving towards regional integration in the continent. And so this is a very timely discussion that we're having, especially as in a crisis, you know, that countries continuously try to look internally. There is pressure to look internally, but it's very important that during this time, we realize that there is a lot more gain when we work together, when we cooperate. And so we should continue to push forward with push forward, push forward, push forward, push forward. Okay, thank you. All right, so
please
I think, like I was saying, it's important that we maintain the momentum for negotiating and implementing the AfCFTA, and particularly going forward, it should be a people's project, because it is in time people would rather have it more internally. So when it is more people focused, we have our constituents understand why it's important that we push for regional integration, and that they also understand what they can benefit from African countries coming together instead of just looking outside of African borders. And it's important that we also look at the youth, women, and other vulnerable communities, because what COVID has done for us, it has really shown some of those cracks and some of the issues that have been swept a couple of years, has shown us that we can no longer ignore that even though people have come out of poverty, they remain extremely vulnerable to poverty. And this COVID crisis has shown us that by throwing millions of Africans back into poverty with just 1 month lockdown or a couple of weeks lockdown, informal sector. So it's important that as we move forward, we bring these people along in the negotiations for the AfCFTA, and that the implementation also really focuses on those particular groups. And we have also, just other than just talking about the negatives, I can also talk about what has been proven to work for us. We have seen that when Africans are left to their own devices, they rise to the challenge, and we have seen our local productive capacities increase. We've seen in food production and production of health and medicine-related products also being produced locally. And this just shows that if we work on an enabling environment, if we work on investment, then we can be able to truly have value addition within the. And also we've seen that when we work towards We've seen a shift in the way that we deliver services, particularly in government and in forums like these. We are now moving to a more digitalized world. And before, I'll tell you, 2 years ago, I was part of the UNSG's digitalization cooperation on digitalization, and there was still a little bit of hesitation over whether or not Africans should engage in this conversation. But now we have been pushed to do it, and we're seeing African governments participating and providing services more efficiently through digital space. And now here we are today. I'm pretty sure that during the first Tana Forum, they never imagined that they would have a digital forum. And we've seen also projects being acted on with an urgent manner. And if it can be done in a couple of months, upgrading schools, clinics, in order to incorporate the COVID protocols, then surely everything else can be done. It has shown that the spirit of urgency is actually there, and if we are determined to do something, then we can do it. So I just want to conclude and say, you know, the private sector has to be a main part of implementing the AfCFTA. The role of governments is to facilitate, to provide an enabling environment, and then give enough space for the private sector to do what they need to do and to drive wealth generation and creation of economies. And I'd like to challenge all of the policymakers, the leaders in the room, to take at least 3 of the takeaways that were presented a little earlier by Philip, those that they were not already implementing, and implement in their own countries, and ensure that as we soldier on, we're at least on an aligned march. And lastly, as I said, all these cracks and dirt under the rug is out in the open now. We have an opportunity in this very tornado of a year to recognize them and to fill the cracks as we try to build back better. But we should ensure that as we're building back better, it is in a more inclusive manner towards building more resilient economies and reducing the vulnerability of Africans to poverty. So I will stop there, Chris, and hear from you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and also thank you for being cognizant of the time. If you'll allow me, Mekinwendo, let me ask you this question. One of the key takeouts that were presented today by Philip, our rapporteur, was the fact that what we need to do is move away from a state-centric model and really have at the center of this development or implementation of the Continental Free Trade Area, the community. And by community here, I think for many African countries, we cannot forget that most trade occurs within the informal sector. It is driven by many small and medium enterprises. As former trade minister of Botswana, what's your view on this, and what's your take?
No, I think it's certainly practical.
Or is this just a pipe dream?
One of the things that we have to focus on is to create an enabling doing business environment, and one that works for all people regardless of the levels that they are in. And this is about access to services, to government services, access to finance at all levels, providing tiered models, and really ensuring that at the same space you have properly targeted interventions for the informal sector, for women, and for young people. And some of these actually we had started doing when I was minister, looking at the indigenous economy, which I think is one way of ensuring that you're bringing people that feel they are not part of a westernized economic model. But if you ask them to trade in the indigenous knowledge and the indigenous products, then they will be more of the effective and active participants in their economies, and we can trade. For us, it was a focus on indigenous knowledge, indigenous products for export.
Fantastic. You are recognized as one of the most influential young leaders that we have on our continent. and certainly not just an influential young leader, and a young leader who happens to be a woman. One of the key features that we have seen in past implementation phases has been the exclusion of women folk from such developments. I don't know if it's because of the structure of our societies or simply because of the dominant position of males in such society. What's your view on this? How can we ensure that more women are mainstreamed
certainly
into this
some
free
people
trade,
argue that trade and
implementation?
the economy is actually a non-gender topic. But I beg to differ with that completely, because if an economy is to thrive and we are to ensure that everyone has sustainable livelihoods, then we need to focus on the vulnerable groups. And we know that across the world it's women and it's young people. And we need to make provisions that allow and empower women to participate in an economy. And some of those go back to some of our legislation and regulations. And I'll give you an example. Last year, both South Africa and Botswana were eliminating some legislation that prohibited women to own pieces of land if they were married. And these are the kind of regulations that inhibit women to be active participants in the economy. You can't take a loan if you don't own land. You can't take a loan if your husband does. And we know as a reality that, some husbands do not want their wives to participate. And so they are completely removed from the space. So what we need to look at is more of background issues. It's not just with the AfCFTA, it's the background issues at national points. What are the main issues legislatively, regulation that prohibit women from being active participants in the economy? And then when we get to the AfCFTA, we also make provisions for gender-focused provisions, gender-focused measures to ensure that women are recognized as key stakeholders. Particularly because we know that in the informal sector, we have informal sector cross-border trade. It's more women. So we have to look at how we can ease those processes for the women and even allow and recognize that our economies will do even better.
Wonderful.
Yes, and I
could go on and on with you on this conversation. Unfortunately, the program director seems to be indicating to me that we need to move on. But all that's left for me to do, Keniwendo, is just really to thank you, Kaholebo.
Thank you very much, and good
thank
luck
you for
with
your
the rest of the
participation
program.
and for your key and keen insights today. Thank you very much. All right, so effectively what we have on the program is what is described as an opportunity to really honor some of the heroes of former Tana conferences. Certainly, as one of the newbies here, I'd have to call upon, first of all, Dr. Jonas, the director of the Institute for Peace and Security, to come up and assist me to do this. Our program director, do you mind also coming up so that we can honor these heroes of previous Tanas?